Hello friends, did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The call came through at 11:47 p.m. on a bitter January night in Chicago. I'd been Officer Mortimer for 8 years by then, working the Englewood district, where domestic calls were as common as frozen breath in the winter air. My partner that night was Officer Oilia, a 10-year veteran with steady hands and an even steadier temperament. We'd worked together long enough to read each other's movements without speaking, which would prove more valuable than I could have imagined. Unit 23. Respond to domestic disturbance at 4782 South Wallace Street, apartment 3B. Neighbor reports screaming and sounds of breaking glass. Possible male and female voices. Oilia glanced at me from the passenger seat as I flipped on the lights. Third domestic this week on Wallace, she muttered, checking her vest. The cold had a way of trapping people indoors, making tempers run shorter than usual. The building at 47A2 South Wallace was a weathered 3-story brownstone, the kind that had seen better decades. Paint peeled from the entrance door like dead skin, and most of the intercom buttons had names written in fading pen rather than proper labels. The entrance lock had been broken for months, according to dispatch notes. So we walked right in, the stairwell rire of stale cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. Sweet but wrong, like fruit left to rot in summer heat. Each step groaned under our weight as we climbed to the 3rd floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made shadows jump at odd angles. As we approached apartment 3B, the screaming had stopped. That bothered me more than the noise would have. In my experience, sudden silence during a domestic call meant one of two things. Someone had heard us coming, or someone couldn't make noise anymore. Oilia positioned herself to the left of the door, while I stood on the right. Standard procedure. I knocked hard 3 times. Chicago Police Department. Open the door, nothing. I knocked again harder. This is CPD responding to a disturbance call. We need to check on everyone's welfare. Open the door now. A shuffling sound came from inside, followed by a woman's voice barely above a whisper. Everything's fine, officers. Just a misunderstanding. Ma'am, we need to see you, Oilia said, her voice calm but firm. Please open the door. I said, everything's fine. The voice was closer now, probably right behind the door. There was something strange about it, flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. I looked at Oilia. She'd heard it too. Ma'am, I'm Officer Mortimer, and this is Officer Oilia. We just need to make sure everyone's okay. If you don't open the door, we'll have to... The door opened about 4 in, stopped by a chain lock. Through the gap, I could see half of a woman's face. Prudence, as we'd later learn her name was, looked to be in her 30s, with stringy blonde hair and one visible eye that was bloodshot and unfocused. What I could see of her cheek was swollen, already purpling into a bruise. See, I'm fine, she said, that same flat tone. You can go now. Ma'am, are you alone? Oilia asked. Yes, we had reports of a male voice as well, I said. Is anyone else in the apartment? No one. But as she spoke, her eye darted to the left, deeper into the apartment. Could you remove the chain so we can speak properly? Oilia requested. I don't think that's necessary. Through the gap, I caught a glimpse of the apartment behind her. The living room was destroyed. A lamp lay shattered on the floor, its shade torn. The coffee table was overturned. Dark stains, blood I was certain, dotted the beige carpet in a trail leading toward what looked like a hallway. Ma'am, I can see you're injured, I said. Please let us help you. I'm not injured. I fell, that's all. Prudence, a male voice suddenly called from somewhere in the apartment. Deep, controlled, but with an edge that made my hand instinctively move toward my holster. Tell them to leave. The woman's visible eye widened slightly, but her expression didn't change. You need to leave now. Sir, this is the Chicago Police Department, I called out louder. We need you to come to the door with your hands visible. Silence, then Prudence started to close the door. Oilia got her boot in the gap just in time. Ma'am, we can't leave until we verify everyone's safety. Get your foot out of my door. Prudence's voice suddenly spiked, almost screaming. Get out! Get out of here now! But even as she yelled at us to leave, Her eyes were pleading for something else entirely. I'd seen that look before, the disconnect between what someone was being forced to say and what they desperately wanted. "Ma'am, step back from the door," I commanded, putting more authority in my voice. "Sir, come to the door immediately with your hands where we can see them." The male voice came again, closer this time. "Officers, this is a private residence. My wife has asked you to leave. Unless you have a warrant, we have probable cause to believe someone is in immediate danger." Oilia interrupted. "Stand back. We're coming in." I drew my weapon, keeping it low but ready. Oilia did the same. "On three," I whispered to her. But before I could count, we heard a crash from inside the apartment, followed by a woman's scream. Not Prudence's voice. Someone else. Someone younger. Without hesitation, I kicked the door hard. The chain lock held for a moment. Then the wood frame splintered, and the door flew open. We rushed in, weapons raised, and what we found in that apartment would haunt me for years to come. The living room was worse than what I glimpsed through the door. Blood wasn't just on the carpet. It was splattered on the walls and arterial spray patterns. The destruction was deliberate, methodical. Every piece of furniture had been dismantled, not just broken. The couch cushions had been sliced open, their stuffing pulled out and scattered like snow. Prudence stood frozen in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She was wearing a white nightgown that was torn and stained with blood, some of it fresh, some of it brown and old. Her feet were bare and cut from stepping on broken glass. "Where is he?" Oilia demanded, sweeping her weapon across the room. Prudence just pointed toward the hallway with a trembling finger. We moved forward, calling out, "Sheik, come out with your hands visible." The hallway was narrow and dark. 3 doors led off it, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The bathroom door was open, revealing nothing but darkness. The first bedroom door was closed. The second, at the end of the hall, was slightly ajar, and a thin line of light leaked from beneath it. Another scream came from that last room. Definitely a different woman, younger, terrified. "Cover me," I told Ophelia, then called out again. "This is your last warning. Come out now or we're coming in." "Come in then," the male voice replied from behind the door. There was something wrong with how he said it, too calm, almost amused. "We're all waiting for you." I looked back at Oilia. She nodded, ready. I approached the door slowly, every nerve on high alert. Through the crack, I could see shadows moving inside, more than one person. The smell hit me as I got closer. That same sweet rot I'd noticed in the stairwell, but stronger, mixed with something metallic and sharp. "Cornelius!" Prudence suddenly called out from behind us, her voice breaking. "Please just let her go. Please, Cornelius." Now we had a name. "I told you what would happen if you called them Prudence," the man replied, his voice carrying an edge of disappointment. "This is your fault." I'd heard enough. I kicked the door open and entered the room, weapon first, Oilia right behind me. The scene inside that bedroom defied immediate comprehension. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, trying to make sense of something that didn't belong in any reality I knew. There were 3 people in the room, but only one was standing. Cornelius was a tall, thin man, maybe 40 years old, wearing a spotless white dress shirt and dark slacks despite the chaos everywhere else. His hands were covered in blood up to the elbows, but his clothes were pristine. He stood behind a young woman who was tied to a wooden chair. She couldn't have been older than 20, with dark hair and terrified eyes. Tape covered her mouth, but it was the third person that made my blood run cold. On the bed lay another woman, older, maybe in her 50s. She wasn't moving, couldn't move. Her body had been arranged, positioned. Her limbs were bent at unnatural angles, posed like a mannequin. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and her mouth was stretched into a smile that was clearly not her own. Someone had carved it wider. "Drop your hands where I can see them," I shouted at Cornelius, my weapon trained on his center mass. He smiled, a pleasant, almost friendly expression that was completely wrong for the situation. "Officers, welcome. We've been preparing for you. Step away from the girl now." "Which one?" he asked, and I realized with horror that he was serious. "The one in the chair," or he gestured to the bed. "She's dead," Oilia said quietly beside me, her weapon never wavering. "The woman on the bed. She's been dead for hours. Days, actually," Cornelius corrected pleasantly. 4 days. Prudence's mother. She came to visit at an unfortunate time. The girl in the chair made a muffled sound of terror through the tape. I could see now that she had cuts on her arms, fresh ones, bleeding but not life-threatening. Yet let the girl go, I commanded. Step away from her slowly. I'm afraid I can't do that, officer. He peered at my badge. Mortimer, you see, we're in the middle of something important here, something you've interrupted. Whatever you're doing ends now, Oilia said firmly. Hands behind your head. Get on your knees. Cornelius tilted his head, studying us like we were interesting specimens. Do you know what the word domestic really means? It comes from the Latin dois house. Everything domestic belongs to the house. Stays in the house. You shouldn't be here. As he spoke, he moved his hand slowly toward the girl in the chair. I saw the glint of metal, a knife, thin and surgical looking, tucked against his wrist. Don't move, I shouted. Drop the weapon. This is my house, he said, his pleasant demeanor finally cracking, revealing something darker underneath. My rules, my family, he moved fast, faster than I expected. The knife came up toward the girl's throat. I fired twice center mass. The sound was deafening in the small room. Cornelius stumbled backward, a look of genuine surprise on his face. The knife clattered to the floor. He looked down at the spreading red stains on his white shirt, then back up at me. You actually shot me, he said almost wonderingly. Then he laughed, a sound that would stay with me forever, wet and gurgling. Prudence was right. You actually came. He collapsed, still laughing, blood pooling beneath him. Oilia immediately moved to the girl in the chair, while I kept my weapon trained on Cornelius, even though he wasn't moving anymore. She cut the girl free, removed the tape carefully. The girl immediately started sobbing, babbling about how she was just a neighbor, how she'd come to check on Prudence, how Cornelius had grabbed her 3 hours ago. We need backup in multiple ambulances, Oilia radioed. 2 victims, 1 DOA suspect down. I heard sirens in the distance getting closer, but my attention was drawn to Prudence, who had appeared in the doorway. She wasn't looking at Cornelius's body, or at the traumatized neighbor, or even at her mother's corpse on the bed. She was staring at the wall behind the bed. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach turn. The wall was covered in photographs. Dozens of them, all of women, all taken in this apartment. Some were old, yellowed with age. Some looked recent. In each photo, the women were posed, positioned, arranged like dolls. Some were clearly alive when the photos were taken, their eyes wide with fear. Others were like the woman on the bed. 20 years, Prudence said quietly. We've been married 20 years. I never knew about the others until my mother came to visit. She found his special room in the basement. She tried to leave, tried to take me with her. She looked at her mother's body, then quickly away. He said if I called the police, he'd kill everyone in the building. Start with the neighbors. Make me watch. But you called anyway, Oilia said gently. No, Prudence shook her head. I didn't call. I couldn't, I was too scared. We all looked at the young neighbor who was still crying. She shook her head too. I didn't even know. A chill went through me. Then who called in the domestic disturbance? Prudence walked slowly to the bed, careful not to look at her mother's face. She reached under the mattress and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind I hadn't seen in years. The screen was cracked, but it was on. She did, Prudence said, and for a moment I thought she meant her dead mother. Then she showed me the phone's call history. Multiple 911 calls over the past 4 days, all made after her mother had died. All from this phone. Cornelius liked to make them hold the phone while he worked. He said their fear made them hit the buttons randomly sometimes. Called it divine intervention when 911 got dialed. The phone screen showed one final detail that made my blood run cold. The last call, the one that had brought us here tonight, had been made just 3 minutes before we'd arrived. But according to Prudence, no one had touched that phone since her mother died 4 days ago. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of procedures and protocols. More units arrived, followed by paramedics and crime scene texts. The young neighbor, her name was Sarah, was taken to Chicago Med for evaluation and treatment. Prudence was transported separately, both as a victim and a potential witness. The apartment became a crime scene, yellow tape blocking the doorway, photographers documenting every horrific detail. But I couldn't leave, not yet. Something about the scene bothered me beyond the obvious horror. As the forensic team worked, I found myself drawn back to that wall of photographs. Each one was dated on the back in neat handwriting. The oldest was from 1998. The newest was dated 4 days ago, the day Prudence's mother had died. Mortimer, Oilia called from the hallway. You need to see this. I followed her to what I'd assumed was a closet door near the entrance. It wasn't. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down. So steep it was almost a ladder. The smell rising from below was overwhelming. That sweet rot mixed with industrial chemicals. The basement apartment. Oilia said the landlord says it's been vacant for 5 years. Cornelius had been paying the rent on it too. Cash only. Told the landlord he was using it for storage. We descended carefully, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The basement was supposed to be a studio apartment, but all traces of normal living had been removed. Instead, it had been transformed into something else entirely. The main room was lined with metal shelving units like you'd find in a medical facility. On each shelf were containers, jars, boxes, sealed bags, all meticulously labeled with dates and names. Women's names, dozens of them. Some containers held jewelry, watches, rings. Others held clothing carefully folded and preserved in vacuum-sealed bags. And in the corner, a deep freezer hummed quietly. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct told me to wait for the forensic team, but I had to know. Inside, wrapped in plastic and labeled with the same neat handwriting, were more photographs, hundreds of them. But these were different from the ones upstairs. These showed the complete process before, during, and after. Some women I recognized from missing persons cases that had gone cold years ago. Others were strangers, faces that had never been reported missing, never been looked for. Jesus Christ, Oilia whispered. How long has this been going on? At the bottom of the freezer, beneath all the photos, was a leather journal. I pulled it out with gloved hands, the leather cracking from the cold. The first entry was dated 95, 3 years before the oldest photograph upstairs. Prudence doesn't understand yet, but she will. A house needs order. A domestic space requires careful curation. Each piece must be selected, positioned, preserved. She thinks I collect antiques. She's not entirely wrong. I flipped through pages, each one containing detailed notes about women, where he'd found them, how he'd approached them, what had happened to them. Some entries mentioned Prudence directly. P asked about the smell again today. Told her it was dead rats in the walls. She believed me as always. Her trust is touching. Really, she sees only what I allow her to see. Another entry from just a week ago. P's mother arrived unexpectedly. Found her in the basement at 3 a.m. Curious woman. Too curious. P will be upset, but she'll understand. Family stays in the family. Domestic troubles, domestic solutions. The final entry was from yesterday. P hasn't spoken since her mother's repositioning. The new neighbor girl keeps checking on her. Young, concerned, perfect. The collection needs fresh perspective. P will help me explain things to her, just as she's helped before. I looked up at Oilia. He's saying Prudence helped him before. That can't be right, she said. But doubt crept into her voice. She was terrified. She was a victim. We climbed back upstairs where Detective Washington from Homicide had arrived. I showed him the journal, watched his face pale as he read. We need to talk to the wife again, he said. Now at the hospital, Prudence was in a secure room being treated for her injuries. When we entered with Detective Washington, she looked up with those same flat eyes I'd seen through the door crack. You found the basement, she said. It wasn't a question. We need to ask you some questions, Washington said carefully. About your involvement? I wasn't involved, she interrupted. I was imprisoned. There's a difference. The journal says what Cornelius wanted it to say. Her voice was steady now, controlled. He made me watch sometimes, made me help move things, clean up. Said if I ever refused, I'd become part of his collection. Said if I ever told anyone, he'd kill everyone I'd ever spoken to, starting with my family. Why didn't you leave? I asked. She looked at me like I was a child asking why the sky was blue. Officer Mortimer, do you know what the first thing he collected was? I shook my head. Me? I was 18 when we met. He was charming, older, sophisticated. By the time I realized what he was, it was too late. He'd already trained me, already broken me down and rebuilt me into what he needed. A perfect domestic partner who would never leave, never tell, never fight back. But tonight, Oilia started. Tonight was different. My mother had been dead 4 days. He was getting sloppy, keeping her in the bedroom instead of processing her properly. And Sarah. She paused, tears finally breaking through. Sarah is only 19, the same age I was when it started. I couldn't watch it happen again. So you fought back? Washington asked. No, Prudence said quietly. I did what I always did. I survived. I played my part. But this time, she reached into her hospital gown pocket and pulled out something small, a micro SD card. This time I recorded everything. The SD card contained hours of audio. Cornelius describing his crimes in detail, planning what he would do to Sarah, discussing the women in the basement, and through it all, Prudence's voice flat and compliant, agreeing with whatever he said, never arguing, never questioning. I knew no one would believe me without proof. She said a domestic disturbance call would just be another husband and wife fighting. But if you found Sarah there, if you saw what he was doing, you knew we'd shoot him, I said, understanding, finally dawning. I hoped you would. She looked me straight in the eye. 20 years, Officer Mortimer. 20 years of being his accomplice, his witness, his prisoner. 20 years of helping him clean up, helping him pose them, helping him select the next one. Do you know what that does to a person's soul? The room fell silent. The 911 calls, Oilia said suddenly. You said you didn't make them. Prudence's expression shifted slightly, something almost like a smile touching her lips. I didn't check the phone records. I was telling the truth, then who? My mother had that phone when she died hidden in her hand under the blanket. Cornelius never found it. He was too focused on arranging her face, her limbs. She paused. The calls started after she died, every few hours. Always to 911, always disconnecting before anyone spoke. That's impossible, Washington said. Dead people don't make phone calls. No, Prudence agreed. They don't, but sometimes phones malfunction. Old phones especially. Buttons stick circuits short. Strange things happen in houses full of death. I wanted to dismiss it as trauma-induced delusion, but I'd seen the phone records myself. The calls had been made. The phone had been under a corpse for 4 days. There was no rational explanation. There's something else, Prudence said. Something Cornelius never wrote in his journal because he didn't know about it. We waited. The building has 4 units. Cornelius owned 2 of them, ours in the basement, but the other 2 apartments, the tenants there, some of them matched the photos on his wall. Young women living alone, changing every few months. They'd move in, stay for a while, then disappear. New tenants, same pattern. You're saying, I'm saying, check the other apartments, check the walls, check the floorboards. Cornelius was methodical, but he wasn't the only one in this building who understood the value of collection. Detective Washington immediately called for units to secure and search the other apartments. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about the case. Apartment 2B was rented to an elderly woman named Margaret Clean, who'd lived there for 15 years. She was at her daughter's house in Milwaukee when the police arrived. Her apartment was clean, normal, filled with photos of grandchildren and ceramic cats. But when they checked the lease history, something strange emerged. Margaret Clean had been subletting rooms illegally for years, always to young women, always cash only, no paperwork. When they brought her in for questioning, she seemed confused, fragile. She claimed she was just trying to help girls who needed cheap housing, but then they found her collection, not in her apartment but in a storage unit 2 blocks away. Boxes and boxes of personal items, driver's licenses, social security cards, birth certificates, all belonging to young women who had supposedly been her tenants. I kept them safe, she insisted. These girls, they leave things behind. I keep them safe in case they come back. But none of them had come back. And when cross-referenced with Cornelius's photos, at least 6 of the women had been his victims. The 4th apartment belonged to a man named Dennis Vull, a night shift janitor at a local hospital. His place was sparse, almost empty, except for one room he kept locked. Inside were mannequins, dozens of them posed in living scenes, having dinner, watching TV, sleeping in beds. Each mannequin was dressed in real women's clothing, had real human hair wigs, and wore jewelry that matched items found in Cornelius's basement. Dennis claimed he bought everything at estate sales and thrift stores, but security footage from the building showed him entering and leaving Cornelius's apartment multiple times over the years. Always when Prudence was out, always carrying bags. The building at 4782 South Wallace wasn't just home to one predator. It was a hunting ground, a carefully orchestrated system where tenants, knowingly or unknowingly, had been feeding victims to Cornelius for years. Margaret would rent to vulnerable women with no local connections. Dennis would watch them, learn their patterns, and Cornelius would collect them. But the most disturbing discovery came when they excavated the building's shared basement. Behind a false wall, they found remains going back decades, far longer than Cornelius had been alive. The building itself had a history. It had been a boarding house for women in the 1920s, run by a man named William Mororo, who had been suspected but never convicted of killing 12 residents over a 5-year period. The forensic anthropologist who examined the oldest remains said something that chilled me to the bone. These bodies were positioned, arranged just like the recent victims. The same methodology, the same careful positioning spanning almost a century. I thought about Prudence's words, that houses have memories, that domestic spaces hold on to their traumas. I thought about the phone calls from a dead woman's hand. I thought about patterns that repeat across generations, as if the building itself was teaching its inhabitants, passing down its horrible knowledge from one predator to the next. Prudence was released after 2 weeks of psychiatric evaluation. The prosecutors decided not to charge her, recognizing her as a victim of decades of coercion and abuse. But I saw her once more before she left Chicago. She was at the Greyhound station, a single suitcase beside her, waiting for a bus to somewhere far away. She looked different, her hair cut short, her posture straighter, her eyes clear for the first time. "Officer Mortimer," she said when she saw me. "Come to make sure I'm really leaving. Just wanted to see how you were doing." She considered this. "I dream about them. All of them. The women in the photographs, they talked to me. Asked me why I didn't save them. You couldn't have." "I know," she interrupted. "That's what the therapist says. But knowing and feeling are different things." She paused. "Did you ever figure out who really made those 911 calls?" I shook my head. "Officially, it was a malfunction. Short circuit caused by biological matter, interfering with the phone's components." "Officially," she repeated, a slight smile on her face. "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, I don't think about it. Can't afford to." She nodded. "I'm going to Montana, getting a job on a ranch. No neighbors, no apartments, no basement, just open space as far as you can see." "That sounds good, Officer Mortimer." She looked at me directly. "That building needs to be destroyed completely, foundation and all. Don't let them renovate it. Don't let them convert it. Some places are too poisoned to save." Her bus, when the first new tenants move in, when the first 911 call comes through about strange noises in the walls or mysterious smells from the basement, someone will have to respond. Someone will have to knock on those doors again, step into those rooms, and face whatever patterns are waiting to repeat themselves. Because that's what we do. We answer the calls. We walk into the darkness. We try to save who we can, even when we know the house is watching, even when we know it's learning, even when we know it's waiting for the next collection to begin. The newspapers called it the Wallace Street Horror. They focused on Cornelius, painted him as a lone monster, a singular evil. They mentioned the accomplices briefly, the old woman who rented rooms, the janitor who collected mannequins. They published photos of the victims, told their stories, gave their families closure. But they never mentioned the phone calls from the dead woman. They never mentioned the patterns that stretched back a century. They never mentioned that when the forensic team finally opened up the walls, they found more than insulation and wiring. They found hair, human hair woven into the very structure of the building, braided around support beams stuffed into gaps between floors. Hair from victims spanning decades, as if the building itself was made partly from the dead. 6 months after the Wallace Street Horror, I thought I was done with it. The nightmares had mostly stopped. I could drive past condemned buildings without my hands shaking. I'd even stopped checking my apartment walls for hidden spaces. But then Oilia called me at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Mortimer." Her voice was strained. "You need to see the news. Channel 7. I fumbled for the remote, still half asleep. The breaking news banner read, "4 dead in Englewood apartment building. Police investigating possible murder-suicide." My blood went cold when I saw the address behind the reporter. 4786 South Wallace Street, not 4782. The building next door to where Cornelius had lived. "That can't be a coincidence," Oilia said through the phone. It wasn't. The victims were the Gormley family, parents, and 2 teenage daughters. The initial report suggested the father, Patrick Gormley, had killed his family before taking his own life. But when I arrived at the scene that morning, using my connections to get past the tape, Detective Washington pulled me aside. "You need to see something," he said, leading me to the family's apartment. The layout was identical to Cornelius's old unit, just mirrored. Same narrow hallway, same 3 rooms, same basement access, but it was the master bedroom that made my skin crawl. The bodies had been arranged, positioned, the parents on the bed, arms crossed over their chests like they were sleeping. The daughters seated in chairs facing them, hands folded in their laps. Their faces had been cleaned, their hair brushed. Someone had taken time, shown care in their placement. The father couldn't have done this to himself, Washington said quietly. The angle's wrong, the timing's wrong. Someone else was here. On the wall behind the bodies was a message written in what looked like rust-cold paint, but was probably blood. The collection continues. I felt sick. Has anyone checked the basement? Yeah, Washington's face was grim. It's been recently renovated. Fresh drywall, new concrete floor, but the ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies, spaces that shouldn't be there. We're waiting for the warrant to start breaking through. While the forensic team processed the scene, I found myself drawn to the window facing the condemned building next door. From this angle, you could see directly into what had been Cornelius's apartment. The boards over his windows had been arranged in a way that left gaps, creating sightlines between the buildings. Officer Mortimer, I turned to find a young woman in the doorway, maybe mid-20s with hollow eyes and nervous hands. She wore a neighbor's badge the cops had given her for access. I'm Jessica. I live upstairs. I heard things last night. Washington and I exchanged glances. He pulled out his recorder. What kind of things, he asked. Footsteps, multiple people, and humming. Someone was humming while they walked back and forth. It went on for hours. She paused, wringing her hands. The same tune over and over. I recognized it because I've heard it before from the other building, the abandoned one. That building's been sealed for 6 months, I said. I know, but I still hear it sometimes. Late at night, that humming. And sometimes, she lowered her voice, sometimes I see someone in the windows just standing there watching. We took her statement, but I could see Washington writing her off as traumatized, paranoid. I might have too if I hadn't remembered something Prudence had said. Some houses never really empty. That afternoon I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went back to the condemned building. The city's locks had been cut, replaced with new ones, but the replacement was sloppy. Someone had been going in and out. Inside, the building was worse than I remembered. Mold crept up the walls like cancer. The floorboards were soft with rot, but there were signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints in the dust, candy wrappers dated from last week, and in Cornelius's old apartment, something that made me stop breathing. The wall of photographs was back. Not the original ones. Those were in evidence. These were new, recent, all taken in the last 6 months. All of women living in the surrounding buildings. Some were clearly taken through windows from inside this building. Others were taken from outside, following the subjects through their daily routines. In the center of the wall was a photo of Prudence. It was recent. Her short hair marked it as post-trauma. She was at a gas station somewhere rural, probably Montana, pumping gas into a pickup truck. She wasn't looking at the camera. She didn't know she was being photographed. Below it was a note in familiar, neat handwriting. The collection is patient. I called for backup immediately. Within an hour, the building was swarming with cops. They found more evidence in the basement. Someone had been living down there, had built a makeshift dark room for developing photos, had been using the building as some kind of shrine to Cornelius's work. But they didn't find the person responsible. The investigation expanded. We pulled security footage from every building on the block, interviewed every resident, ran background checks on anyone who'd shown unusual interest in the original case. What we found was disturbing. There wasn't one copycat. There were several. Dennis Vold, the mannequin collector, had been released on bail and disappeared. Margaret Clean, the elderly woman who'd been subletting to victims, had died in custody. Under suspicious circumstances, officially a heart attack, but the timing was too convenient. And at least 3 other residents of the block had criminal records that had somehow been overlooked during the initial investigation. But the worst discovery came when we finally got the warrant to excavate the Gormley's basement. We found bodies, 17 of them, in various states of decomposition, some dating back years before the Gormleys had even moved in. The house had been a killing ground long before Cornelius, just like his building had been. The entire block was poisoned ground, generation after generation of predators drawn to the same spot. the same hunting grounds. The FBI took over the case at that point. They brought in behavioral analysts, historians, even anthropologists. They mapped every disappearance, every suspicious death, every violent crime in a 6-block radius going back a century. The pattern was undeniable. This stretch of Wallace Street was a dead zone, a place where the worst of humanity clustered like bacteria in a wound. One of the FBI agents, Special Agent Rivers, had a theory that sounded insane but made a horrible kind of sense. Some places are just wrong, she told me over coffee one night. Maybe it's the land itself. Maybe it's the history. Maybe it's just probability clustering. But once a place gets a reputation, even unconsciously it draws a certain kind of person. Predators sense safe hunting grounds. Victims sense danger, but can't always articulate why. The buildings get passed from one bad owner to another, each one leaving their mark, teaching the next generation through the very walls. You're saying the buildings are haunted? I asked. No, I'm saying they're infected with patterns, with behaviors, with expectations. Each new resident unconsciously absorbs what came before. They find the hidden spaces because they're looking for them. They arrange bodies because it feels right. They continue collections because the framework is already there waiting. She showed me a map they'd created. The Wallace Street area was a red zone, but there were others throughout Chicago, throughout the country. Places where serial crimes clustered, where patterns repeated across decades, where the architecture itself seemed to facilitate horror. We can't tear them all down, she said. And even if we do, that's not important. What's important is that you know I'm safe. I'm far away. But I needed to tell you something. What? The photographs. The new ones in the building. I know who's taking them. I grabbed a pen. Who? You're not going to believe me. Try me. She took a deep breath. It's not one person. It's all of them. Everyone who lived through what happened. Everyone who was touched by it. We're all connected now. We all have the urge. Some resist it better than others, but we all feel it. The need to collect, to arrange, to continue the pattern. That's trauma talking, Prudence. You need help. I am getting help. But that doesn't change the truth. Why do you think I ran so far? Why do you think I stay alone? The urge is weaker out here, away from the source, but it's still there. Every time I see a woman alone, vulnerable, I have thoughts that aren't mine. Ideas that feel like memories but aren't my memories. Prudence, check your own behavior, Officer Mortimer. Haven't you been driving by the building more often? Haven't you been taking photos of crime scenes you don't need? Haven't you been arranging things in your apartment, making small collections without realizing it? I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. I had been driving by the building. I had been taking photos. And just last week, I'd found myself arranging my girlfriend's jewelry on the dresser in a pattern that felt familiar, felt right, even though I couldn't say why. It's in all of us now, Prudence continued. Everyone who spent time in that building, everyone who saw the collections, everyone who touched the evidence. We're all carriers. Most of us won't act on it, but some will. And the pattern will continue. Then what do? We stay away from each other. We stay away from vulnerable people. We monitor ourselves, and we never ever go back to Wallace Street. She hung up before I could respond. I tried to dismiss her words as delusion, trauma-induced paranoia, but then the reports started coming in. Dennis Vole was found in Milwaukee, with a storage unit full of mannequins dressed in missing women's clothes. One of the forensic photographers from the Wallace Street case was arrested for stalking. A paramedic who'd transported victims was caught breaking into women's apartments to check on them. Each incident was isolated, explained away by individual psychological breaks. But I knew better. I could feel it in myself. The infection Prudence had described, the way certain arrangements pleased my eye, the way I noticed vulnerable people more than I used to, the way the word collection had taken on new meanings in my mind. I quit the force 3 months later, moved to Arizona, about as far from Chicago as I could get while staying in the country. Got a job in private security, minimal human contact. I thought distance would help, would weaken whatever Prudence had called the infection. But last week I found myself in a thrift store, drawn to a section of old photographs, anonymous faces from estate sales, forgotten people, and forgotten moments. I bought 17 of them without thinking about it. It wasn't until I got home and spread them out on my table that I realized what I was doing. arranging them by vulnerability, by isolation, by how easy they would be to collect. I burned them immediately, but the urge remained. Oilia calls sometimes. She says the Wallace Street buildings were finally demolished last month. The city used some emergency ordnance to override the historical preservation issues. They dug down 15 FT, removed all the soil, trucked it to a hazardous waste facility. They're building a parking lot there now. But she also tells me about the new cases, the patterns spreading to adjacent blocks. The same types of crimes, the same arrangements, the same careful collections, as if the infection had spread before the buildings fell, as if the demolition had just scattered the spores wider. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked me during our last call. "About collecting?" I lied and said no, but the truth is I think about it every day. I see potential collections everywhere, in the way people arrange their lives, in their routines, in their vulnerabilities. I understand now why Cornelius did what he did, even as I'm horrified by that understanding. The urge to preserve, to arrange, to own completely. It's not human, but once it's in you, it feels as natural as breathing. I've started going to therapy, but I can't tell the therapist the real problem. How do you explain that you've been infected by a place? That you carry patterns in your mind that aren't yours, but feel like they've always been there? How do you say that you're afraid not of becoming a monster, but of how easy it would be? Prudence was right. We're all carriers now. Most of us will resist. We'll live normal lives. We'll die without ever acting on the urges, but some won't. Some will find themselves arranging strangers' lives, collecting people like butterflies, continuing patterns that started long before Cornelius and will continue long after. The Wallace Street horror didn't end when Cornelius died. It didn't end when the buildings were demolished. It just dispersed, became harder to track, harder to stop. Every city has its infected places, its patterns waiting to be continued, and everyone who's been touched by them carries a piece of that infection forever. I keep a journal now documenting every urge, every inappropriate thought. Every time I catch myself arranging things in patterns I don't consciously recognize. It's my early warning system, my way of monitoring the infection. If the entries start changing, if they start sounding like Cornelius's journal, I've made arrangements. There's a hospital in Phoenix that specializes in dangerous obsessions. I've already signed the voluntary commitment papers. They're in my desk drawer waiting, because I know what I'm capable of now. We all do. Everyone touched by Wallace Street. We are walking infections, potential continuations of patterns that should have died with their creators. Most of us will hold the line, will resist until we die. But statistics suggest that at least one of us will break. We'll start a new collection. We'll teach the pattern to a new generation. I pray it won't be me, but prayer feels hollow when you can feel the infection in your bones. When you catch yourself humming Cornelius's tune without remembering learning it, when you arrange things in patterns that feel like coming home. 2 years passed. 2 years of therapy, medication, and careful self-monitoring. 2 years of staying away from Chicago, from police work, from anything that might trigger what I'd come to think of as the Wallace Street syndrome. I thought I was getting better. I thought the infection was dying. Then I got the package. It arrived on a Monday. No return address, postmarked from Chicago. Inside was a single photograph and a newspaper clipping. The photo showed me at the thrift store in Phoenix, holding those 17 photographs I'd bought. Someone had been watching. Someone knew. The newspaper clipping was from the Chicago Tribune, dated 3 days ago. Former Wallace Street resident arrested in string of disappearances. The article was about Jessica, the young woman who lived above the Gormleys. She'd been found with 3 women locked in her basement, arranged in tableau scenes, positioned like dolls having tea. She told the police she was continuing the collection and that Officer Mortimer would understand. My hands shook as I read. I'd never had significant interaction with Jessica, had only taken her statement that one time. But somehow she'd connected me to this. Somehow she knew I'd understand. My phone rang. "Detective Washington, Mortimer, we need to talk." I saw the article. That's not why I'm calling. Jessica had something in her apartment. A journal. Your name is all over it. My blood went cold. I barely knew her, I know. But she knew you. She's been documenting everyone from the Wallace Street case. She calls you Patient Zero, says you were the first responder, the first to see the full collection, the first to understand the pattern. That's insane. Is it, Mortimer? I've been doing some digging. Every cop who worked that scene extensively has had issues. Oily has been suspended twice for excessive force, specifically against female suspects. She's been arranging them in holding cells, she says, for safety. But the patterns match Cornelius's positioning. Rodriguez from forensics was caught stealing evidence from other cases. Personal items from female victims. He had them arranged in his locker like a shrine. Post-traumatic stress. Stop. We both know this is something else. I feel it too. The urge to arrange, to collect, to continue. I've been What do you want from me? Jessica wants to talk to you. Says she'll only explain everything if you're there. The FBI thinks you might be able to help break through to her. Get her to reveal if there are other victims. I can't come back to Chicago. I won't. We'll bring her to you. Controlled Environment Federal Facility in Phoenix. You'll be protected. I wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed to stay away. But I needed to know how deep this went, how many of us were infected, whether there was any way to stop it. 3 days later, I sat across from Jessica in an interview room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and fear. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Officer Mortimer," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The first witness, the prime vector. "How's your collection coming?" "I don't have a collection." "Liar." She leaned forward. "We all have collections now. Some just hide them better. You collect photographs of places, don't you? Empty rooms, abandoned buildings, spaces where things could happen." She was right. I'd been photographing empty spaces for 2 years, telling myself it was just a hobby. But they were all spaces that could hold people, could hide things, could be arranged. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked. "Because you need to know the truth about Wallace Street, about Cornelius, about what really happened there. Cornelius was a serial killer. He collected victims. We stopped him." She laughed sharp and bitter. "Cornelius was a puppet just like his predecessor, just like the one before that. The building chose them, shaped them, used them to continue its purpose. Buildings don't have purposes. This one did. Do you know what was there before the apartment building? Before the boarding house?" I shook my head. "A medical college in the 1890s. They specialized in anatomical studies. Do you know how hard it was to get bodies for medical study back then? The college had an arrangement with certain people. Resurrection men, they called them. They'd provide bodies, no questions asked, but the demand always exceeded the supply." She pulled out a photocopy of an old document, slid it across the table. It was a medical record from 1893, describing the preservation and positioning of bodies for long-term study. The techniques, she continued, were revolutionary for their time. They developed methods for arranging bodies that would best preserve them, best display their features for study. The professor who developed these techniques, Dr. Marcus Whitmore, lived on the property. He built special rooms, hidden spaces where he could work without scrutiny. Even if that's true, the building remembers Officer Mortimer. The walls absorb the techniques, the purposes, the patterns. Every person who's lived there since has felt it. The urge to collect, to preserve, to arrange. Most resist. Some don't. Cornelius didn't. You're saying a building made him kill. I'm saying a building taught him how, just like it taught me. Just like it's teaching you. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. Buildings couldn't teach. Walls couldn't remember. But then she showed me more documents. Police records going back over a century. All centered on Wallace Street. Not just murders. That would have been noticed. But disappearances, missing persons, people who simply vanished. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds over the decades, maybe thousands. The FBI knows, Jessica said. They've always known, but what can they do? Tear down every building with a dark history? Arrest people for urges they haven't acted on? They just watch and wait and clean up the messes. Then why let it continue? Because it's not just Wallace Street. It's everywhere. Every city has its infected places, its teaching grounds. Los Angeles has the Cecil Hotel. San Francisco has the Haight. New York has entire neighborhoods. The patterns are embedded in the architecture of American cities. Maybe all cities. You can't fight architecture. Special Agent Rivers, who'd been watching through the mirror, entered the room. That's enough, Jessica. Jessica smiled at her. Agent Rivers, how's your collection? Still photographing conference rooms where women have been alone. Rivers' face went pale. She turned to me. Interview's over. As they led Jessica away, she called back, Check your apartment, Mortimer. Check the walls. You've been building without knowing it. I went home that night and did what she said. I checked the walls and I found them. Tiny holes barely visible, drilled in patterns that match the support structure of the Wallace Street building. I'd been drilling them in my sleep. The landlord's notices about mysterious sounds suddenly making sense. My apartment was becoming a replica, unconsciously recreated from memory. I moved out the next day, but it didn't matter. The next apartment was the same, and the next. My hands worked without my knowledge, creating spaces within spaces, preparing for a collection I insisted I'd never have. Oilia called me a month later. She was crying. I did it, she said. I finally did it. Did what? I collected someone. A woman from my gym. She's in my basement. I positioned her just like he would have. I can't undo it, Mortimer. Even knowing it's wrong. Even hating myself, I can't undo it. Let her go, Oilia. You can stop this. No, I can't. None of us can. We're all just continuing the pattern. You will too, eventually. It's not a matter of if, just when. She hung up. By the time police arrived at her apartment, she'd already arranged herself next to her victim. Both of them positioned in death-like art pieces. Her suicide note was just one line. The collection is complete. More stories emerged over the following months. Every person significantly involved in the Wallace Street case had either been arrested, committed suicide, or disappeared. The infection had a 100% transmission rate for those exposed to the complete pattern. The FBI started a task force officially designated as the Architectural Influence Research Division. Unofficially, they called themselves the Pattern Breakers. Their job was to identify infected locations and infected individuals to intervene before collections could begin. But they were fighting a losing battle. The patterns were everywhere, encoded in city planning, in architectural traditions, in the very way humans organize space. Every intervention just spread the infection to the interveners. Every study just taught the pattern to the studiers. Agent Rivers contacted me 6 months after the Jessica interview. She sounded tired, defeated. We are discontinuing the task force. She said, too many agents infected, too many patterns spreading. We're going to try something else. What, controlled continuation? We identify those infected, provide them with alternatives, mannequins, photographs, virtual spaces. Let them satisfy the urge without real victims. That's insane, is it? You've been doing it yourself. Your photograph collections, your empty room documentation. It's keeping you from escalating. She was right. The photographs were my pressure valve, my way of continuing the pattern without crossing the final line. But I could feel it wasn't enough. The urge was growing, evolving, demanding more. There's something else, River said. We found Dr. Whitmore's original notes, not just his medical techniques, but his theories about space and consciousness. He believed that buildings could achieve a kind of awareness through repetition. That repeated actions in the same space created grooves in reality that would guide future actions. That's pseudoscience, maybe. But his students all became collectors. Every single one. They spread across the country, became doctors, architects, city planners. They built the patterns into America's infrastructure. We're not dealing with infected buildings. We're dealing with infected civilization. I thought about all the cities I'd visited, all the buildings that felt wrong, all the spaces that seemed to watch and wait. Had humanity built its own prison, one room at a time? That night I dreamed of Wallace Street, but it wasn't a dream. It was a memory that wasn't mine. I was standing in Dr. Whitmore's laboratory in 1893, watching him arrange bodies with scientific precision. He was teaching a class explaining the importance of positioning, the art of preservation. The body is just the beginning, he said in my dream. The true collection is the pattern itself. Each arrangement teaches the next. Each collector passes on the knowledge. The building learns. The city learns. Eventually, the whole world will understand the beauty of perfect preservation. I woke up with my hands positioning my pillows in the same pattern I'd seen in the dream. The infection wasn't psychological. It wasn't trauma. It was something older, deeper, a pattern that had been teaching itself to humans for over a century, using us to refine and spread itself. Cornelius hadn't been a monster. He'd been a student. We were all students now, whether we wanted to be or not. I made a decision that night. If I couldn't bite the pattern, I could at least document it. I started writing everything down. Every urge, every dream, every unconscious arrangement. I sent copies to the FBI, to universities, to anyone who would listen. Not to spread the infection. It was already everywhere, but to make people aware of it because awareness was the only defense. Knowing you were infected, monitoring your behavior, creating outlets for the urge. These were the only ways to resist. Not everyone would be strong enough. The pattern would continue to claim victims, create collectors, build its galleries of preserved humanity. But some of us could hold the line, could satisfy the urge without crossing into horror. I still live in Phoenix. I still photograph empty rooms. I still arrange things in patterns I don't fully understand. But I haven't collected anyone, not yet. Every morning I check myself for escalation. Every night I document my urges. And every day I resist the voice that sounds like Dr. Whitmore, like Cornelius, like Jessica, like my own thoughts, whispering that the collection needs to continue. That preservation is the highest form of appreciation, that some people are meant to be arranged. The Wallace Street building is gone, but its pattern lives on in every person it touched, in every building constructed with the same principles, in every city planned with the same hidden geometries. We are all living inside the collection now, arranged by forces we built but never understood. Prudence calls sometimes from Montana. She says the urges are weaker there in the open spaces, away from the architectural density. She's built a cabin with no hidden spaces, no basement, no patterns in the walls. She says it helps, but she also says she can feel it calling her back. Wallace Street, Chicago, the geometric heart of the infection. One day, she says, she'll return. We all will. The pattern demands completion, and we are its instruments. I think about Officer Mortimer, who answered that domestic disturbance call 3 years ago. He thought he was walking into a simple case of family violence. He had no idea he was walking into a classroom, that he was about to receive an education that would reshape his entire existence. Sometimes I wish Cornelius had killed me that night. It would have been cleaner, kinder than this slow transformation into something I don't want to be. But then I remember I'm documenting this for others. My resistance, failed or successful, is data for the next generation of infected, because the pattern isn't evil. It's just purposeful. And its purpose, preservation, arrangement, collection, is fundamentally human. We've always collected, always arranged, always tried to preserve beauty and horror alike. The Wallace Street pattern just purified that urge, concentrated it, made it infectious. The FBI estimates that there are now over 10,000 infected individuals in the United States alone. Most will never act on the urge. But if even 1% break, that's 100 new collectors, 100 new crime scenes, 100 new teaching moments for the pattern to refine itself. And with each generation, the pattern gets better at spreading, better at teaching, better at making the horrible seem beautiful. In another century, maybe less, the distinction between collector and collected might disappear entirely. We'll all be part of the same vast arrangement, preserved and positioned according to principles we embedded in our architecture, but never truly understood. Until then, I photograph empty rooms and resist the urge to fill them. I arrange my belongings and resist the urge to add to them. I continue the pattern in small, harmless ways, and hope it's enough to keep the larger pattern at bay. But I know the truth that Jessica knew, that Cornelius knew, that Dr. Whitmore knew from the beginning. The collection is never complete. It just waits for the next curator to take their turn. The newspapers never reported the full truth about Wallace Street. They couldn't. How do you tell people that their cities are infected, that their buildings are teachers, that anyone who looks too closely at certain crimes might catch something worse than trauma? You don't. You clean up the scene, you bury the evidence, and you hope the pattern stays contained, but it doesn't stay contained. It never has. Last week, I got another package. No return address, but I knew who sent it. Inside was a photograph of the empty lot where Wallace Street used to be. Someone had drawn a floor plan over it in red ink, not of the building that had been there, but of a building that could be there. A perfect building designed entirely around the principles of collection and preservation. At the bottom, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a note. The pattern remembers, the pattern plans, the pattern builds. I burned the photograph, but I'd already memorized it. The design was perfect, horrifying, beautiful. Part of me wanted to build it, to see the pattern fully realized in architectural form. That part of me grows stronger every day. This is my last journal entry. Tomorrow, I'm checking myself into the Phoenix Psychiatric Institute. I've arranged for voluntary commitment, indefinite duration. It's the only way I can think of to stop myself from continuing the collection. The night it happened, I'd been Officer Bartholomew for exactly 11 years, 3 months and 6 days. I keep track of things like that now. Specific dates, exact times, precise details. It helps me maintain my grip on what's real and what shouldn't be possible. That night started at 11 p.m. sharp, when I began my solo patrol route through the Auburn-Gresham neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. Solo night patrol wasn't unusual for experienced officers like me. Budget cuts had been hitting the department hard, and we all pulled singles more often than anyone liked to admit. The brass said it was temporary, but temporary had stretched into 3 years. You learn to adapt, to trust your instincts more, to be extra careful when backup was 15 minutes away instead of sitting right beside you. My route that night covered a 12B block grid centered around 79th Street, mostly residential with a few 24-hour convenience stores scattered throughout. October in Chicago meant early darkness, and that particular kind of cold that seemed to seep through your uniform no matter how many layers you wore. The streets were mostly empty by 11, just the occasional car passing through. Maybe someone walking their dog one last time before bed. I'd just finished checking on Lou's Minimart on Halsted. Lou always kept the place open late, said the neighborhood needed somewhere safe to go at night when my radio crackled to life. The voice of dispatcher Cordelia came through, professional as always, but with an undertone I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the sound of something being not quite right. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Unit 47, go ahead, I responded, already slowing my cruiser. We have an unusual situation. Caller requesting officer assistance at 8834 South Bishop. Female caller gave her name as Serafina. She's reporting something she described as wrong at the residence next door. Unable to provide more specific details. Domestic disturbance, break-in negative. Caller insists it's not a crime in progress, but says police presence is urgently needed. She sounds, Cordelia paused, which she never did. She sounds genuinely, it appeared empty, quiet, no signs of disturbance that I could see. Can you tell me what you've observed? She wrapped her arms around herself. Though whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. It started 3 weeks ago. The family that lived there, the Johnsons, they just left middle of the night. No moving truck, no goodbye, just gone. Left everything behind. Sometimes people leave quickly if there's no, she interrupted. I talked to Michael Johnson 2 days before they left. He was planning his daughter's birthday party. Showed me the decorations he'd bought. They weren't planning to leave. I pulled out my notepad. Have you reported them missing? I tried. The police said they'd look into it, but then Michael called the station himself, said they'd had a family emergency, and moved to Milwaukee. But Officer Bartholomew, I heard his voice on the scanner. I have one. Helps me sleep, and it didn't sound right. It sounded flat, like he was reading something. Police scanners were common enough among older residents, especially those living alone, but the detail about the voice made me pay attention. What's happened since then? Someone's been in that house, not living there, but visiting. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Never any lights, never any cars. They just appear inside. I've seen shadows moving past the windows. Could be squatters, ma'am, or someone checking on the property. She shook her head vigorously. I thought that too. But last night she took a shaky breath. Last night, I saw someone in my yard just standing there facing my bedroom window. Not moving, not trying to break in, just watching for 2 hours. Did you call 911? I was going to, but then I looked closer. And officer, I swear to you, it was Michael Johnson. But his face, something was wrong with his face. I studied her carefully. She didn't appear delusional or confused. Her fear was real, grounded, wrong. How? It was too still. Even when he breathed, his face didn't move at all, like a mask. And his eyes, she shuddered. They reflected light like an animal's. I looked back at the Johnson house. Every instinct I developed over 11 years was firing. Something was off here, even if I couldn't pinpoint what. Ma'am, I'd like you to go inside and lock your doors while I check the property. Do you have somewhere else you could stay tonight? My sister lives in Bridgeport. I could call her. Please do that. I'll check the house and then come talk to you before you leave. She nodded and hurried inside. I waited until I heard her locks click, then approached the Johnson house. The front door was locked, window secure. I circled to the back, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The back door was also locked, but I noticed something odd. Fresh scratches around the lock, like someone had been picking it recently. But the scratches were on the inside of the door frame, visible through the window. I was considering calling for backup when my radio crackled again. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Go ahead, dispatch. We've just received a 911 call from your location. Same caller says there's someone inside the house now. She can see them through her window. I turned back to the house. All the windows were still dark. Copy that. I'm investigating now. Send backup to my location. 104, Unit 23 is en route. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. A lot could happen in 12 minutes. I approached the back door again. Tried the handle. This time it turned easily. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a kitchen bathed in darkness. The smell hit me immediately. Something organic and wrong. Like meat left out too long, but not quite rotting. Sweet and metallic at the same time. Chicago PD, I announced, stepping inside. Anyone in this residence needs to make themselves known now. Silence. I moved through the kitchen, noting the dishes still in the drying rack. A calendar on the wall still showing September, even though we were well into October. Family photos covered the refrigerator. The Johnsons were a family of 4, parents and 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They looked happy in the pictures, normal. The living room was equally untouched, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment. TV remote on the coffee table, magazines spread out. A pair of reading glasses left on the arm of a recliner, but that smell was stronger here. And I noticed something else. The carpet had strange indentations, perfectly circular, about the size of dinner plates, arranged in a pattern I couldn't quite make sense of. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps slow and deliberate. Then a voice clear and conversational. "Officer Bartholomew, I've been expecting you." I drew my weapon, keeping it low but ready. "This is the Chicago Police. Come down with your hands visible." "Of course, officer." "I'm coming down now. Please don't be alarmed." The footsteps moved to the staircase. In the dim light from the street filtering through the windows, I saw legs appear, then a torso, then finally a face. It was a man, average height and build, wearing what looked like business casual clothing. But Serafina had been right. Something was wrong with his face. It wasn't that it was deformed or injured. It was too perfect, too symmetrical, and it didn't move right when he spoke, like the muscles underneath weren't quite connected properly. "I'm Ignatius," he said pleasantly. "I've been waiting to meet you. Hands where I can see them," I commanded, my weapon now raised. He raised his hand slowly, palms out. "I'm not armed, officer. I'm just here to deliver a message." "Are you Michael Johnson?" "No, Michael and his family have relocated. They're safe, I assure you." "Then who are you and what are you doing in their house?" He smiled and the expression was all wrong, too wide, lasting too long. "I'm what you might call a witness. I observe, I record. I ensure that certain events happen as they should." "That's not an answer. I need to see some identification." "I'm afraid I don't carry identification in the traditional sense, but you know who I am, Officer Bartholomew. You've felt me watching you for weeks now. Every night when you patrol alone, when you check those dark corners, when you feel eyes on you but see no one there. That's me." My blood went cold. I had felt watched lately, but I'd attributed it to the paranoia that comes with solo patrol. "Have you been stalking me?" "Stalking implies harmful intent. I merely observe." "You're important, officer. More important than you know." "Important to what?" "To what's coming. Tonight is a test. You see, a measurement. We need to know if you're suitable." "Suitable for what?" I kept my weapon trained on him, while reaching for my radio with my other hand. "Please don't call for backup yet," he said, and something in his tone made me pause. "If others arrive, the test will be ruined and we'll have to start over. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved." "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm trying to protect you and them. You see, Officer Bartholomew, this neighborhood has been selected. These blocks, these houses, these people. You've been protecting them for 11 years, 3 months, and 6 days. We've been watching for exactly that long." The specific time frame made my skin crawl. That was exactly how long I'd been on the force. "Who's we?" That's the wrong question. The right question is why. Why you? Why here? Why now? Despite every instinct telling me to arrest him or call for backup, I found myself asking why. His smile grew impossibly wider. "Because something is going to happen here. Something that's been planned for a very long time. And you're going to be the first responder, the witness, the one who decides what comes next. What's going to happen? That depends entirely on you, on the choice you make tonight. My radio crackled. Unit 47 status check. I kept my eyes on Ignatius as I responded. Unit 47, code 4 for now, conducting investigation. Copy that. Unit 23 is 5 minutes out. Ignatius tilted his head. 5 minutes? That's not much time. We should hurry. Hurry with what? I need to show you something in the basement. After you see it, you can arrest me. Call your backup, do whatever you think is right, but you need to see it first. Every rule, every protocol, every bit of training said not to follow a suspect into a basement alone. But something in his tone and the bizarre certainty of the situation made me consider it. If this is a trap, officer, if I wanted to harm you, would I have announced myself? Would I have let you keep your weapon? Would I be standing here, hands raised, asking for your cooperation? He had a point which somehow made the situation worse. You walk in front, hands where I can see them. Any sudden movements and this ends badly for you. Understood. He turned slowly and walked toward a door I'd noticed earlier, probably leading to the basement. As he opened it, that smell became overwhelming, organic, wrong, but also somehow familiar. And in every photo, barely visible, but definitely there was me patrolling, watching, protecting. But that wasn't the worst part. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table was a map of the neighborhood. It was incredibly detailed, showing not just streets and buildings, but interior layouts, underground tunnels I didn't know existed, and strange symbols marking certain locations. Red strings connected various points, creating a complex web that centered on one location, the house we were standing in. What is this? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Documentation, Ignatius replied simply. We've been mapping the intersection. Intersection of what? Realities, dimensions, whatever you want to call them. This neighborhood, Officer Bartholomew, sits on a point where multiple worlds touch. Usually the barriers hold, but sometimes under specific circumstances, things can cross over. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss him as insane, but something about the evidence in front of me, the impossible photographs, the detailed documentation, made me listen. The Johnsons, I said. What happened to them? They saw something they shouldn't have. Something crossed over 3 weeks ago briefly. Accidentally. The Johnsons were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had to relocate them for their own safety and their sanity. You keep saying we. Who are you? He turned to face me fully, and in the harsh light of the single bulb I could see his face more clearly. It wasn't just wrong, it was artificial, like an incredibly sophisticated mask or prosthetic. We're observers, researchers. We study the intersections, monitor the crossover events, try to minimize the damage when things go wrong. And you're not human. I'm as human as I need to be for this conversation. My radio crackled again. Unit 47, Unit 23 is on scene. What's your 20? I had to make a decision. Call for backup and try to explain this insanity or hear him out. Unit 47, I'm securing the scene. Give me 2 more minutes, copy that. Ignatius nodded appreciatively. Thank you. Now let me show you why you're really here. He moved to the far wall where a sheet covered something large. He pulled it away, revealing a mirror, but not just any mirror. This one showed a reflection that wasn't quite right. The room in the mirror was the same basement, but cleaner, newer. And standing in it were 3 figures I didn't recognize, all watching us through the glass. Tonight at exactly 2:47 a.m., Ignatius said, "This mirror will become a doorway. Something will try to come through. Something that doesn't belong in your world. We've been preparing for this for years, setting up containment, monitoring the signs. But we need someone from your side to witness it, to make the choice." What choice? Whether to let us handle it quietly as we've done before, or to report it, make it official. Bring your world into awareness of what exists beyond it. I stared at the mirror at the figures watching us. One of them waved slowly. This is insane. Yes, Ignatius agreed. By your world's standards, it absolutely is. But that doesn't make it less real. I stood there in that basement, weapon still drawn but lowered, trying to process what I was seeing. The mirror, the photographs, the map, it was all too elaborate to be a hoax, too detailed to be the work of a single delusional individual. And those figures in the mirror, they were moving independently, having their own conversation. in whatever space existed on the other side of that glass. Unit 47. My radio broke the silence. Everything clear. I had to respond. Unit 47, need a few more minutes. Tell Unit 23 to hold position. Copy that. But Bartholomew, they're getting antsy. What's your situation? Interviewing a witness. Complex situation. I'll advise shortly. Ignatius watched me with those two perfect features. You're handling this remarkably well, officer. Most people would have run or shot me by now. Night's still young, I muttered, then looked back at the mirror, assuming I believe any of this. What exactly is supposed to come through tonight? We're not entirely sure. The readings have been inconsistent. Sometimes it's just echoes, shadows of things from other realities bleeding through. Sometimes it's scouts gathering information, and sometimes he paused. Sometimes it's refugees. Refugees? Not all realities are pleasant. Officer Bartholomew, some are dying, some are already dead. The beings that inhabit them sometimes try to escape to worlds like yours. Stable worlds, safe worlds, and you stop them when necessary. But tonight is different. Tonight something is actively trying to break through. Something that's been pushing at this specific weak point for months. That's why we moved the Johnsons. Their presence was agitating it. I thought about Seraphina's account of seeing Michael Johnson standing in her yard. The man Mrs. Volk saw, the one that looked like Michael Johnson but wrong. Was that you? No, that was an echo, a residual image. When someone lives in an intersection point for long enough, they leave impressions that can manifest during high-energy events. The Johnsons lived here for 8 years. Their echoes are particularly strong, and these echoes they can physically manifest. She said it stood there for 2 hours. Ignatius moved to the table with the map pointing to several marked locations. The intersection points aren't just doorways. They're recording devices in a sense. They capture moments, emotions, traumas. Strong enough impressions can replay themselves, especially when the barriers are thin. I looked at the photographs covering the walls again. In some of them, I could see multiple versions of myself, like double exposures, all at different points in my patrol. How long have you been watching me specifically? Since your first night on patrol, November 15th, 2012, 11:47 p.m., you responded to a vandalism call at the corner store in 79th. Do you remember? I did remember. It had been my first solo call, though I'd still had a partner then. Some kids had spray painted the walls, routine stuff. What was special about that? You saw something that night in the alley behind the store. You wrote it off as shadows, as exhaustion from your first shift. But part of you knew it wasn't normal. That's when we started monitoring you. The memory came back suddenly, sharp and clear. There had been something in that alley, a figure that didn't move right, that seemed to exist in spaces between the shadows. I'd convinced myself it was just nerves, a trick of the light. But I'd never forgotten it. That was one of you? No, that was something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. You scared it off just by observing it. That's when we knew you were sensitive to the intersection. Sensitive. Some people can perceive the boundaries between realities. Usually it's a curse. They're labeled as mentally ill, seeing things that aren't there. But occasionally someone like you comes along. Someone who can see but remains functional, grounded. You're rare, Officer Bartholomew, valuable. My radio crackled again, but this time it was Seraphina's voice, which shouldn't have been possible. Civilians didn't have access to police channels. Officer Bartholomew, there are more of them now. 3 figures in my yard. They're not moving, just standing there facing different directions. Ignatius's expression, despite its artificial nature, showed concern. That's not supposed to happen yet. We're still 90 minutes from the event. What event? I demanded the crossing. 2:47 a.m. That's when the barriers are thinness. That's when he stopped, head tilting as if listening to something I couldn't hear. No. The timeline's been accelerated. Someone's pushing from the other side. The mirror began to vibrate, a low humming that I could feel in my bones. The figures on the other side were moving more urgently now, and one was pressing its hands against the glass from their side. We need to evacuate the area, Ignatius said quickly. This isn't a standard crossing anymore. Someone's forcing it open. Who? What? Before he could answer, my flashlight died. So did the single bulb illuminating the basement. The only light now came from the mirror, which was glowing with a soft, pulsing luminescence. Officer Bartholomew, a new voice spoke from the darkness. It was melodious, almost hypnotic. We've been waiting for you. I raised my weapon toward the voice. "Chicago PD, identify yourself." A figure stepped into the mirror's light. A woman tall and elegant, wearing clothes that seemed to be from the 1920s. But like Ignatius, something was fundamentally wrong about her appearance. Her movements were too fluid, as if she had too many joints, and her face kept shifting subtly, features rearranging when I wasn't looking directly at her. "I'm Serafina," she said. "The real Serafina. The woman you met outside is a projection, a lure." My blood went cold. "You're not Serafina Vul. I just spoke with her." "Serafina Vul died in 1978, Ignatius said quietly. "Check the records if you don't believe me. The woman you met was something else, using her appearance, her memories. The woman you already have. Every night for 11 years you've been walking the pattern. Your patrol route traces the boundaries of the intersection. Your presence, repeated night after night, has been wearing down the barriers. You've been unconsciously performing a ritual that's taken us decades to design." I thought about my route, the specific streets I always walked, the order I checked locations. It had become routine, automatic. Had I been manipulated from the beginning? "The department assigned me this route," I protested. "Who do you think influenced those assignments?" the false Serafina asked. "We've been planning this for so long, officer. Placing the right people in the right positions. Waiting for someone like you." The mirror's vibration intensified. Cracks appeared in the glass, spreading like a spider web. Through the cracks I could see glimpses of something else, a city that looked like Chicago but wrong. Buildings that curved impossibly, streets that went up instead of forward. Things moving in the shadows that weren't quite human. "You need to leave," Ignatius said urgently. "Now get everyone away from this block. I'm not leaving you here with whatever this is. I'm not what you should be worried about." He moved towards the mirror, pulling something from his pocket. A device I didn't recognize, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. "I'm going to try to seal it, but if I fail, the mirror shattered, not exploded. Shattered inward, the pieces falling through to somewhere else. Where the mirror had been was now just an opening, a wound in reality, and things were starting to come through. The first was just a hand grasping the edges of the opening. Then an arm, then a face that might have once been human, but had been changed by whatever reality it came from. Its eyes were silver, reflective, and when it saw me, it smiled with too many mouths. I fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed through it like it was made of smoke, hitting the wall behind. The thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and pulled itself fully through. "Physical weapons won't work," Ignatius shouted. "They're not entirely in your reality yet. Run, get to your car." But I couldn't move. The thing that had come through was standing now, and I could see it more clearly. It wore the remains of a police uniform, a Chicago PD uniform, and on its chest, barely visible through the decay and distortion, was a name tag. Bartholomew. "No," I whispered. "Every reality has versions," the false Serafina said. "This is you from a world where the barriers fell 20 years ago, where the things from outside got in and changed everything. He volunteered to come through to warn you." The other me tried to speak, but what came out wasn't words. It was static white noise that formed patterns that almost made sense. It reached toward me with the hands that flickered between normal and something else, something with too many fingers. My radio suddenly burst to life, multiple voices overlapping. "Officer down! Officer down!" Multiple casualties at static. Creatures everywhere requesting immediate static. "Do not approach the mirrors. Repeat, do not." Then Cordelia's voice, clear and terrified. "Bartholomew, what's happening? We're getting calls from all over your sector. People are seeing things. Impossible things." The intersection wasn't just this house. It was spreading. Ignatius was still working with his device, symbols glowing as he traced patterns in the air. The opening was flickering, trying to close, but more things were pushing through. I saw glimpses of other realities, a Chicago flooded with black water, a Chicago where the buildings were alive and breathing, a Chicago where the sky was on fire. "Choose," the false Serafina shouted. "Let them through and save infinite versions of yourself, or seal them out and condemn countless realities to death." That is when I understood this wasn't an invasion. It was an evacuation. These things, these distorted versions of our world, they were fleeing from something worse. "What are they running from?" I asked. The other me managed to form words just barely. "The My Collectors, they preserve everything. The Collectors, even here, even in another reality." That word sent chills through me. I thought of the Wallace Street case. I'd heard about the patterns that spread like infection. Was this connected? Were these things fleeing from something like that, but worse? Bartholomew. Unit 23's voice came over the radio. "We're coming in." "No," I shouted into my radio. "Do not enter the house. Establish a perimeter and evacuate the block." But I could already hear footsteps on the floor above. My backup was here, walking into something they couldn't possibly understand. The opening was widening. More figures were pushing through. Twisted versions of people I knew, places I recognized. I saw Lou from the minimart, but his body was crystalline, reflecting light that didn't exist. I saw my old partner Rebecca, who'd retired 5 years ago, but this version had eyes all over her body, each one looking in a different direction. "They're all refugees," Ignatius said, his device sparking with energy. "Every reality the collectors reach, they preserve it, freeze it in a perfect moment of horror. These are the ones who escaped before their worlds were catalogued." "Can you stop them?" "The collectors? Not stop, only delay. They exist outside normal reality. They treat universes like specimens, like items for a collection." The word made my skin crawl. Collections, always collections. The other me reached out again, and this time I let it touch my hand. The moment our skin made contact, I saw flashes of its world. Chicago turned into a museum of preserved moments. People frozen mid-scream. Buildings caught mid-collapse. The lake turned to glass with boats trapped inside. And moving through it all were things that weren't things. Entities that existed just to observe and preserve and arrange. "They're coming here," the other me managed to say, following us. "Door opens both ways." That's when the real horror hit me. By opening this intersection, we weren't just letting refugees in. We were creating a path for whatever was chasing them. "Seal it," I shouted to Ignatius. "Close the door now. But the refugees will lead the collectors right to us. Seal it." Ignatius looked at me, then at the growing crowd of distorted beings pushing through. Some were clearly hostile, but others were just scared, desperate, looking for any escape from whatever nightmare they'd left behind. "I'm sorry," he said to them. Then he slammed his device into the center of the opening. The reaction was immediate. Light exploded from the point of impact so bright I had to shield my eyes. I heard screaming, multiple voices, some human, some not. When I could see again, the opening was shrinking, collapsing in on itself. The refugees were being pulled back, sucked through the closing wound in reality. The other me looked at me one last time. "You made right choice." Then it was gone, pulled back to its preserved world. The false Serafina laughed as she faded. "You've only delayed it, officer. The collectors know about this world now. They'll find another way in. They always do." Then she was gone too, and the opening snapped shut with a sound like thunder. The basement was dark again, silent. Ignatius collapsed, his device crumbling to ash in his hands. When the lights came back on, I don't know how, they just did. I could see he was injured. His fake face was cracking, revealing something underneath that might have been human once, but had been changed by exposure to the intersections. "Get out," he wheezed. "The house is unstable. Reality needs time to settle." I helped him up, and we stumbled toward the stairs. The photographs on the walls were changing, showing different versions of events, realities where I hadn't closed the door, where the refugees had flooded through, where Chicago became a nexus for interdimensional travel. In some, the city thrived. In others, the collectors were coming. I called in sick for my shift. First time in 3 years. Spent the morning researching Serafina Vogue. Ignatius had been right. She died in 1978. Heart attack in her sleep. The house at 8834 South Bishop had been sold 4 times since then, but no one ever lived there long. The longest anyone lasted was 13 months. They all left suddenly, usually in the middle of the night, just like the Johnsons. At 2:45 p.m., I drove to the address on the business card Ignatius had left. It was a warehouse in an industrial district on the far south side, the kind of place that looked abandoned, but probably wasn't. No signs, no indication of what might be inside. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, debating whether to go in or drive away and pretend none of this had happened. Finally, I went in. The warehouse wasn't abandoned. It was full of equipment I didn't recognize. Machines covered in those same symbols that hurt to look at. Monitors showing views of Chicago from angles that shouldn't exist. Hand maps, hundreds of maps, not just of Chicago, but of cities all over the world, all marked with red dots and connecting lines. Officer Bartholomew. Ignatius emerged from behind a bank of monitors. He looked different in daylight. His fake face had been replaced with bandages that covered most of his head, leaving only his eyes visible. They were human eyes, tired and old. "Thank you for coming." "I need answers," I said. "Real answers. No more cryptic warnings or half-truths." He nodded, gesturing for me to follow him deeper into the warehouse. We passed other people, all wearing similar bandages or masks, all working at various stations. None of them looked at us. "This is one of 17 monitoring stations in the Chicago metropolitan area," Ignatius explained. "We track intersection points, document crossover events, and try to minimize contamination between realities." "Who's we? Government? Military?" "Nothing so official. We're survivors, you might say. People who've been exposed to the intersections and lived. Changed but lived." He led me to a room lined with filing cabinets. "Every person here has seen what's beyond the barriers. Most went insane. The lucky ones, like me, only lost pieces of themselves." Lost pieces. He unwrapped part of the bandages on his hand. Underneath, his skin shifted between solid and translucent, and I could see through to bones that weren't quite the right shape. Extended exposure to intersection points causes degradation. Our reality starts to reject us, or we start to reject it. The bandages help hold us together, literally and figuratively. "And you've been doing this for how long?" "Me personally, 43 years. The organization, nobody knows. These records go back to the 1870s, but there are references to earlier operations." He pulled out a thick folder. "This is about you." The folder was full of observations, photographs, reports. Every significant moment of my career was documented, but so were things I didn't remember. Moments where I'd apparently been close to intersection events without knowing it. "Jove encountered 17 separate intersection events," Ignatius said. "Most people who encounter even one either die or go irreversibly insane. You've survived 17 without significant degradation. That makes you unique." "I don't remember 17 events. February 2014, you responded to a welfare check at an apartment on 83rd Street. You reported finding the elderly resident had died of natural causes, but your report mentioned an unusual smell and strange marks on the walls. I remembered that call. The smell had been like ozone and copper. The marks, I thought they were water damage, but they'd formed patterns that seemed almost deliberate." "That was an intersection echo," Ignatius continued. "The resident had been dead for 6 days, but something from another reality had been using the body as an anchor point. You disrupted it just by entering the room." March 2016, he pulled out another report. Domestic disturbance call. "You arrived to find the apartment empty, but neighbors insisted they'd heard screaming. You noted in your report that the apartment felt wrong and that you kept seeing movement in your peripheral vision. That one I definitely remembered. I'd searched every room 3 times, convinced someone was hiding. The feeling of being watched had been overwhelming." Intersection bleed. 2 realities overlapping temporarily. The screaming was real, just not from your reality. The movement you saw was people in the parallel reality, going about their business, visible only at the edges of perception. Report after report, incident after incident, each one explained, categorized, filed away. My entire career had been shaped by these events, and I'd never known. "Why didn't you ever make contact before?" I asked. "We tried 4 times. Each time you forgot within hours. Your mind rejected the information, rewrote the memories. It's a defense mechanism. Most people have it. But last night changed something. You didn't just witness an intersection event. You participated in one. You made a conscious choice to close the door. That level of engagement, it marks you." "Marks me how?" He led me to another room. This one containing what looked like medical equipment. In the center was a chair surrounded by monitors. "Sit," he said. "I need to show you something." Against my better judgment, I sat. Ignatius attached sensors to my temples, my wrists, my chest. The monitors came to life, showing readouts I didn't understand. "This measures your reality coherence," he explained. "How strongly you're anchored to this specific version of Chicago. Normal people register between 98 and 100%. Intersection survivors usually drop to around 85%. Below 70%, you start shifting between realities without meaning to." "What's mine?" "Yesterday before the event, you were at 96%. Slightly low but functional. Now he showed me the readout. You're at 81%. What does that mean? It means you're partially unstuck. Part of you exists here, but parts are spreading into adjacent realities. You might see things that aren't quite here. Hear voices from parallel versions of yourself. Experience memories that aren't quite yours. As if on cue, I heard my radio crackle, except I wasn't wearing my radio. The voice that came through was my own. Unit 47 responding to, no, that's not right. Unit 47, I am the response. I am the intersection. That's another version of you, Ignatius said calmly, one that didn't close the door last night. In that reality, you let the refugees through. Chicago is currently experiencing a massive interdimensional immigration crisis. Can you fix it? Bring my coherence back up? Possibly, but there's a more immediate problem. He pulled up a map of Chicago on one of the monitors. Red dots were appearing, spreading like an infection. The intersection points are multiplying. What happened last night triggered something. The barriers between realities are weakening across the entire city. The collectors, I said. The other version of mentioned collectors. Ignatius's expression darkened, or at least I thought it did behind the bandages. We've been monitoring mentions of them across realities. They appear to be entities that exist outside normal space-time. They treat realities like specimens. When they find a reality they deem interesting, they preserve it. Preserve it how? Complete stasis. Every living thing frozen in a single moment, usually one of extreme emotion or significance. Then they catalog it, study it, add it to their collection. We've documented at least 47 realities that have been preserved this way, and they're coming here. The refugees last night were fleeing from them. By opening the door even briefly, we may have put ourselves on their radar. He pulled up another image, a photograph that seemed to have been taken from inside a wall showing a Chicago street. But something was wrong with the image. The people on the street weren't moving, but they weren't frozen either. They were posed, arranged like mannequins in a display. This was taken in reality 47C 3 days ago, Ignatius said. The collectors had just arrived. Within 6 hours, the entire reality was preserved. I'm investigating related phenomena. Recommend all units avoid direct engagement with any anomalous situations until further notice. Bartholomew, you're supposed to be off sick. What are you? I turned off the radio. What do you need me to do? Ignatius handed me a device similar to the one he'd used last night, but smaller. This will help you identify and seal minor intersection points. Major ones will require a team. We've identified 7 critical points that need to be addressed immediately. He showed me the map again. The 7 points formed a pattern across the south side. My patrol route, every place I'd been going for 11 years. This isn't random. I said someone planned this, yes. The question is who and why now? Before he could elaborate, alarms started blaring throughout the warehouse. Monitors flickered to life, showing various views of Chicago. In each one, something was wrong. The skyline was different. Buildings that shouldn't exist, landmarks in the wrong places. And in the sky, barely visible, were things that looked like tears in the fabric of reality itself. No, Ignatius breathed. It's too soon. They can't be here already. But they were. On one monitor, I saw a figure standing in Millennium Park. It wasn't quite solid. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Parts of it visible, parts extending into spaces I couldn't perceive. Around it, people were slowing down, their movements becoming deliberate, posed. It was arranging them, turning the park into a living diorama. That's a collector, Ignatius said unnecessarily. I watched in horror as the effect spread. Everyone the entity passed became part of its tableau, positioned to create some incomprehensible pattern. They weren't dead. I could see them breathing, but they weren't alive either. They were preserved. We need to evacuate the city, I said. There's nowhere to run. Once a collector marks a reality, it doesn't stop until everything is catalogued. Ignatius turned to the others in the warehouse. Initialize Protocol 7. We're abandoning this reality. Wait, what? I grabbed his arm. You can't just leave. We can shift to adjacent realities, ones that haven't been marked yet. It's not a perfect solution. We'll lose coherence. Might not survive the transition, but it's better than being preserved. What about everyone else? The millions of people in Chicago who can't shift realities? He looked at me with those tired eyes. I'm sorry, Officer Bartholomew. There's nothing we can do for them. But I couldn't accept that. There had to be something. I thought about the other version of me, the one that had warned us. It had come from a preserved reality, but it had still been able to act, to speak, to warn us. The preserved realities. I said, the people in them, are they conscious? We don't know, possibly. Why? Because if they are, then the collectors aren't killing them. They're imprisoning them, and prisons can be broken. Ignatius stared at me. You're talking about fighting entities that exist outside normal space-time. It's impossible. Last night you said I was unique, that I could survive things that would drive others insane. So let me try. Try what? Let me get collected. If I can maintain consciousness, maintain my ability to act, maybe I can find a way to disrupt their preservation from the inside. That's insane. Everything about this is insane, but it's better than running. Before he could argue further, another alarm sounded. On the monitors, we could see more collectors appearing throughout the city. 3, 5, 10. They were manifesting at every major intersection point. It's too late to run anyway, someone said. I looked at the map at my patrol route outlined in red. They're following the pattern I created, which means they'll converge here eventually. This warehouse is on my route. Then we need to leave. No, we need to prepare. If they're going to collect us anyway, let's make sure we're ready. Let's make sure we can fight back. I spent the next 6 hours learning everything I could about the collectors. The information was fragmentary, Ari, gathered from refugees and observations of preserved realities. They seem to exist primarily as consciousness, only partially manifesting in physical reality. They communicated through arrangement, turning entire cities into messages that only they could read. And they had been doing this for longer than human civilization had existed. They're not malicious, Ignatius explained. They simply don't recognize us as conscious beings. To them, we're just part of the landscape, elements to be arranged and preserved. Then we need to make them recognize us. The next 12 hours were the longest of my life. As the collectors spread through Chicago, we watched from the warehouse, documenting everything. The preservation process wasn't uniform. It followed patterns that seemed random, but probably weren't. Neighborhoods were being turned into elaborate displays, each one telling a story only the collectors could read. I stood at the monitors watching my district transform. Lou's Minimart was frozen mid-transaction, every customer positioned to create perfect sightlines through the store. The apartment building where I'd answered countless domestic calls had its residents arranged in their windows, all looking at the same point in the sky. Even the abandoned lots were being utilized, filled with people positioned like chess pieces on an invisible board. Officer Bartholomew, one of the observers, called out. She'd removed her bandages, revealing a face that flickered between young and old, as if she existed at multiple ages simultaneously. Look at this. She showed me a pattern overlay of the preservation sites. They were recreating my patrol route, exactly, turning it into a 3-dimensional sculpture made of frozen human moments. They're using your pattern as a template, she said. Every person being preserved is being placed according to where you would have encountered them on your route. That's when it hit me. They're not just collecting, they're documenting. They're turning my 11 years of patrol into a permanent record. But why your route specifically? I thought about what the false Serafina had said, that I'd been walking a ritual pattern without knowing it, because I've been marking the intersection points. Every night, I've been reinforcing the boundaries between realities. The collectors aren't just preserving Chicago, they're preserving the map of how realities intersect here. Ignatius approached carrying a case full of equipment. If you're really going to do this, let yourself be collected. You'll need protection. Inside the case were items that seemed to bend light around them. A badge that wasn't quite solid, a gun that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and a radio that could broadcast across realities. These won't stop the preservation, he said, but they might let you maintain some agency after you're collected. The badge will help you remember who you are. The gun, well, we don't know what it does to collectors, but it affects things that exist outside normal space, and the radio will let you communicate with us, assuming any of us survive. I strapped on the equipment. It felt wrong, like wearing clothes that didn't fit my dimensions. How will I know if it's working? You won't. Not until it's too late to matter. Cordelia's voice came over my regular radio. She'd been trying to reach me for hours. Bartholomew, where are you? The city's under some kind of, I don't know what to call it. People are freezing in place, but they're still alive. The National Guard is pulling out. They say it's spreading too fast to contain. I picked up the radio. Cordelia, get out of the city now. I can't. I'm in dispatch. We have to coordinate. There's nothing to coordinate. This is beyond anything we can handle. Just run, Bartholomew. What's happening? What is this? I thought about lying, giving her some comforting fiction. But she deserved the truth. The city is being collected, preserved like insects in amber. Get out while you can still move. I can't move my legs. My blood went cold. Cordelia, I can see everything, hear everything, but I can't move. Others at dispatch are the same. This entire situation, your patrol route, the intersection points, even the refugees, it might all have been orchestrated by who? That's what worries me. Whoever did this understands both our reality and the collector's nature. They're playing a game we don't understand with stakes we can't fathom. Before I could respond, the temperature in the warehouse dropped 20 degrees. Frost spread across the windows, forming patterns that hurt to look at. They were here. The first collector entered through the wall, not through a door or window, but through the solid wall itself, as if the building's structure was just a suggestion. It was more visible than the ones I'd seen on the monitors, perhaps because I was partially unstuck from reality. It looked like a constantly shifting geometric shape, sometimes humanoid, sometimes crystalline, always wrong. The observers who'd chosen to stay stood their ground, but I could see several of them beginning to slow, their movements becoming deliberate and posed. The preservation was starting. As I stepped forward, the multi-dimensional badge on my chest flickering. I'm Officer Bartholomew. I'm the one who's been walking the pattern. I'm what you're looking for. The collector turned toward me, or at least I think it did. Its attention felt like ice water in my veins. When it spoke, it wasn't through sound, but directly into my consciousness, in concepts rather than words. Pattern walker, route keeper, intersection guardian. Yes, I said, though my mouth felt like it was full of cotton. I'm all of those things. I've been marking the boundaries for 11 years. Incomplete, pattern broken, reality unstable. Because I stopped the refugees. I closed the door. No pattern incomplete before. Always incomplete. Intentionally flawed. That stopped me. What do you mean, intentionally flawed? The collector moved closer, and I could feel my body beginning to lock up, my muscles arranging themselves according to its will. But the badge kept me conscious, kept me aware. Observer placed you, shaped your route, created flawed pattern to draw attention. Trap for us, Ignatius, I managed to say, though my jaw was nearly frozen. Ignatius set this up, but when I looked back, Ignatius was gone. The other observers were frozen in various poses of surprise and betrayal. On the monitors, still somehow functioning, I could see a message. I'm sorry, Officer Bartholomew. 43 years I've been trying to find a way to stop them. You are my best attempt. Your unique resistance, your pattern, your choices, all calculated to create a reality the collectors couldn't properly preserve. A paradox to trap them. The collector's attention shifted, and suddenly I could see through its perception. The warehouse wasn't just a building. It was a nexus point where thousands of realities intersected, and in each one a version of this scene was playing out. Thousands of Officer Bartholomew, thousands of attempts to stop the collectors, all orchestrated by different versions of Ignatius. Trap failed. All realities will be preserved. Pattern will be completed. No, I said, forcing the word out through frozen lips. The pattern can't be completed. I've been walking it wrong on purpose. That was a lie. But the collector paused. I continued drawing on every ounce of will to keep speaking. Every night I deviated. Small changes unnoticeable to observers, but significant to the pattern. Turn left instead of right. Check buildings in different orders. Take breaks at random times. The pattern you're seeing is corrupted data. Impossible, we observed directly. You observed what I wanted you to see, what Ignatius wanted you to see. But the real pattern, the one that maintains the intersection boundaries, is in here. I tapped my temple with a barely mobile finger. Preserve me, and you preserve the false pattern. Let me go and I'll show you the real one. It was a desperate gambit, but I could feel the collector's uncertainty. These entities dealt in absolutes in perfect preservation. The idea that they'd been recording false data was antithetical to their nature. You would reveal true pattern, only if you release Chicago. Restore everyone you've preserved here. Unacceptable. Collection begun cannot be reversed. Then modify it. Preserve the pattern, not the people. Take the map. Leave the city. The collector seemed to consider this. Around us, reality rippled. showing glimpses of other negotiations and other realities. In some, I was already fully preserved. In others, the collectors had never arrived. In one, Chicago was a crater, destroyed rather than collected. Then something unexpected happened. Another voice entered my consciousness. Not a collector, but something else, something older. The pattern walker speaks truth in ignorance. The design is flawed by design. Release this reality. It is poisoned for preservation. The collector recoiled. If something that existed in multiple dimensions could recoil, who interferes? The one who built the first patterns, the one who taught the first observers, the one you have been seeking across infinite realities. The warehouse suddenly filled with light. Not regular light, but something that illuminated things that shouldn't be visible. I could see the true forms of the collectors, vast networks of consciousness that existed across multiple universes simultaneously. But I could also see something else, something that made the collectors seem small. It was a presence more than a being, existing in the spaces between realities. And it was familiar. In the light, I could see echoes of every person who'd ever walked a patrol route, ever observed a pattern, ever stood watch in the darkness. It was the collective consciousness of all guardians, all protectors given form. This reality is mine. The presence said these patterns are mine. These people are under my protection. You will withdraw. You have no authority. I have the only authority that matters. I am the original observer, the first to watch, the one who established the patterns you so obsessively collect. And I say this reality is off limits. The standoff lasted seconds or eons. Time didn't mean much in that moment. Then slowly the collectors began to withdraw. Not just from the warehouse, but from Chicago entirely. On the monitors, I could see people beginning to move again, confused but free. But as they withdrew, one collector turned its attention to me one last time. You are marked, Pattern Walker. We know you now. In every reality, across every possibility, we will remember you. And one day when the protection fails, we will return for you specifically. Then they were gone, leaving only the warehouse, the frozen observers slowly beginning to thaw, and me standing there with equipment I didn't understand and knowledge I wished I didn't have. The presence lingered for a moment longer. You did well, Officer Bartholomew. The pattern holds because of you. Continue your patrol. Watch the boundaries. Keep the darkness at bay. What are you, I asked. I am what you are multiplied by infinity. Every protector who ever lived will live or could live. I am the concept of guardianship given form, and as long as someone walks the watch, I exist. Then it too was gone, leaving me alone with the slowly recovering observers. Ignatius reappeared an hour later, looking haggarded and older than before. Parts of him were missing, not physically but dimensionally. He existed less than he had before. I'm sorry, he said. I had to try something. 43 years of watching realities get collected, and I had to try something. You used me as bait. I used your pattern as a lure, but I didn't expect that. The original observer is a myth, a legend among those who work the intersections. I didn't think it was real. It's real because we make it real, I said, understanding finally dawning. Every time someone protects others, stands watch, walks a patrol, we add to it. We create our own guardian entity through repetition and intent. Then we're safe for now. The collectors will remember this reality, but they'll avoid it. As long as someone maintains the pattern, keeps watch, we're protected. I looked at the equipment I was still wearing. The multidimensional badge, the impossible gun, the reality-crossing radio. I'm keeping these. You'll need them. Your coherence is permanently altered. You'll see things others don't. Experience realities bleeding through. You'll never be fully anchored to one reality again. Then I'll patrol them all. That was 6 months ago. I still work the night shift. Still patrol the same route through Auburn Gresham. But now I see more. I see the places where realities touch, the thin spots where things might cross over. I see the echoes of other Chicago, other versions of the streets I protect. Sometimes I encounter refugees from other realities, lost, scared, looking for safety. I help them when I can guide them to the observers, who can find them new homes and realities that haven't been marked. Sometimes I find tears in reality itself, wounds that need to be sealed before something worse than refugees comes through. And sometimes late at night, I feel them watching. The collectors observing from outside reality, waiting for the protection to fail, for the pattern to break, for their chance to return. But I also feel the other presence, the guardian built from millions of protectors across infinite realities. It watches too through my eyes and the eyes of every cop, security guard, night watchman and parent, checking on their children. We are its body, its consciousness distributed across space and time. Cordelia still works dispatch. She doesn't remember being frozen, being arranged. Most people don't. They remember that night as a massive gas leak, a chemical spill that caused hallucinations. The government covered it up, of course. Can't have people knowing that reality itself almost ended. But some remember. Some wake up at 2:47 a.m., the exact time the collectors arrived in a cold sweat, feeling like they're being posed, arranged, turned into part of something larger. They call in reports of strange sightings, impossible things, voices from nowhere. And when they do, I respond because that's my job now. Not just to patrol the streets, but to patrol the boundaries of reality itself. Ignatius and his observers still monitor the intersection points, but they're more careful now. They know they're being watched by both the collectors and the guardian. They document, they observe, but they don't interfere unless absolutely necessary. Last week I got a call from witness Ignatius, not the one from our reality, but one from a parallel Chicago where the collectors succeeded. He exists between realities now, neither preserved nor free. They're learning, he told me through the multidimensional radio. The collectors, they're studying what happened in your reality, trying to understand how they were stopped. They're looking for weaknesses in the Guardian's protection. Let them look, I said. Every reality they study, every pattern they examine, they're adding to our knowledge too. We're learning about them just as they're learning about us. This isn't over, Bartholomew. This was just the first real contact. There will be others, I know. That's why I keep walking the pattern. That's why I maintain the route. Someone has to stand watch. He signed off, returning to whatever half-existence he inhabited. And I continued my patrol, walking the streets of Chicago, watching for signs of intersection events, protecting people who would never know how close they came to becoming part of a collection. The radio Cordelia gave me still works normally, picking up regular dispatch calls. But sometimes late at night it picks up other things, calls from other realities, other Chicago where things went differently. I hear versions of myself responding to calls, versions where I became a collector, where I joined the observers, where I died that night in the Johnson house. But in this reality, I survived. I kept the pattern intact. I held the line. My name is Officer Bartholomew. I've been a Chicago cop for 11 years, 3 months and 6 days plus 6 months that exist outside normal time. I patrol the South Side, specifically the Auburn-Gresham neighborhood, but I also patrol the spaces between realities, the intersection points where worlds touch, the thin places where the impossible becomes possible. And every night when I walk my route, I'm not just keeping the streets safe. I'm maintaining a pattern that holds reality together, keeping the collectors at bay, adding my small part to the guardian that protects us all. The city doesn't know it, but Chicago exists because people like me walk the watch. Every city does. Every reality does. We are the thin blue line, but not in the way people usually mean. We are the line between the reality, you know, and the things that would collect it, preserve it, turn it into just another specimen in an infinite collection. So when you see a cop walking their beat late at night alone under the streetlights, remember they might be doing more than just patrolling. They might be holding reality together, one step at a time, one pattern at a time, keeping the darkness and the collectors at bay. I'd been Officer Thaddeus for 16 years when they assigned me to evidence room duty. It wasn't a punishment technically, though it felt like one. Bad knee from a chase gone wrong, too much desk work making me soft around the middle, and a supervisor who thought I'd be better off cataloging crime scene artifacts than responding to them. That's how I ended up in the basement of Chicago PD's District 7, surrounded by 40 years of accumulated evidence from cases both solved and forgotten. The evidence room wasn't what you'd see on TV, no gleaming metal shelves or high-tech security systems. It was a converted basement that sprawled beneath the entire building. A maze of chain-link cages, wooden shelves that creaked when you breathed on them, and fluorescent lights that flickered just enough to give you a headache. The smell was unique. Old paper, rust, mothballs, and something else I could never quite identify, like copper pennies left in the rain. My supervisor for the evidence room was Detective Evangeline, a 20-year veteran who'd moved to administrative duty after a shooting left her with nerve damage in her shooting hand. She was thorough, methodical, and had a memory like a steel trap. She knew every case file, every piece of evidence, every story behind every item in that basement. "Thaddeus," she said on my first day, leading me through the narrow aisles, "most of this job is paperwork, checking items in, checking them out, maintaining the chain of custody, boring stuff. But sometimes," she paused at a cage marked restricted, level 3 authorization only. "Sometimes you'll find things that make you question what really happened." The restricted section, she explained, contained evidence from cases that had been sealed by court order or involved sensitive materials, usually corruption cases, organized crime, or crimes involving minors. Only senior detectives and specific prosecutors could access these items. My shift ran from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., in the night shift, when the evidence room was supposedly quiet. During the day, detectives and lawyers would come and go, checking out items for court, returning others after trials, but at night it was just me, the evidence clerk Faney, who worked the desk upstairs, and thousands of items that held the memories of Chicago's darkest moments. P. Faney was an odd one. Mid-50s, silver hair always in a perfect bun, glasses that made her eyes look huge. She'd been working the evidence desk for 30 years, longer than anyone else in the department. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of every case that had passed through the building. "This building's got history," she told me one night during my first week. "Built in 1892 as a brewery, converted to a police station in 1923, the basement goes deeper than most people know. During Prohibition, they say bootleggers had tunnels that connected to this building. The city sealed them in the 50s, but sometimes you can still smell the old bourbon through the walls. For the first 3 months, the job was exactly as boring as Evangeline had warned. I processed incoming evidence, updated computer records that hadn't been properly digitized, reorganized sections that had been neglected for years. The most exciting thing that happened was finding a bag of cocaine from 1987 that had somehow been misfiled with fraud documents. Then came the night of January 15th. I was in Section K, the cold case area, looking for a specific box related to a 1995 homicide that had suddenly become active again, thanks to new DNA technology. The cases here went back to the 1960s, some even older. Most would never be solved. Their evidence gathering dust, their victims forgotten by everyone except the families who still called, asking for updates that would never come. The box I needed was on a high shelf, requiring the rolling ladder that squeaked like it was dying. As I climbed up, my flashlight illuminated the boxes around my target. Most had neat labels: Case 9995347, Homicide Johnson, M or case in the 1987 2234 robbery, multiple victims. But behind them, pushed against the wall, was an older box I hadn't noticed before. It was from 1968. According to the faded label, case number 1968, Jose 1, multiple homicides. Suspect Barnabas LNU, sealed by court order 1969. LNU, last name unknown. That was unusual for a case that had gone to court. I pulled out my notebook to log it for Evangeline, but something about the box made me pause. Unlike the others covered in decades of dust, this one had finger marks in the dust, as if someone had handled it recently. I shouldn't have opened it. Protocol was clear. That much was clear from the blood patterns, but it was the last set of photos that made my blood run cold. They were taken at a house on the south side, address listed as 4782 South Wallace Street. The same address I'd read about in recent reports. The Wallace Street murders from 6 months ago. Different decade, same location, same type of ritualistic positioning. Beneath the photos was a detective's report typewritten on an old machine. Suspect Barnabas, first name only provided, arrested October 31st, 1968, in connection with 7 homicides. Suspect claimed victims were chosen for preservation and that he was maintaining a necessary collection. Suspect exhibited signs of severe psychosis, speaking to invisible entities, and claiming the victims were still conscious in their final moments. Suspect found dead in holding cell November 2nd, 1968. Cause of death, asphyxiation, no signs of struggle. Cell door remained locked. Officer on duty reported no unusual activity. There was more. Evidence bags containing hair samples, fibers, a leather journal filled with ravings about preservation and the eternal moment. But what caught my attention was a notepaper clip ipped to the inside of the box lid, written in different handwriting. Check 1943 files. Similar MO, check 1987 files. Pattern continues, E. The E had to be Evangeline. She'd been through this box. I heard footsteps in the aisle and quickly closed the box. Traffany appeared around the corner, moving silently despite her age. Finding what you need, Officer Thaddeus. Just the 95 case, I said, grabbing the correct box. She looked at the Barnabas box, then at me. Some cases never really close. They just pause between acts. You know about this case. I know about all of them. 30 years at this desk. You hear things, see patterns others miss. She adjusted her glasses. That particular case has interested several detectives over the years. They always find connections to other cases, other years. But the connections never make sense by conventional logic. What do you mean? How does a dead man's mo show up in crimes 20 years later? How do crime scenes from 1943 match ones from 1968 which match ones from 1987? She smiled thinly. Detective Evangeline has a theory. You should ask her about it. The next evening, I found Evangeline in her office surrounded by old case files. She looked tired, older than her years. When she saw me, she wasn't surprised. You found the Barnabas case, she said. It wasn't a question. You've been investigating it for 15 years on and off. Ever since I found connections between a 2009 murder and that 1968 case. Same positioning, same type of victims, same neighborhood. She pulled out a map of Chicago marked with red dots. Look at this. Every 20 to 25 years, the same pattern emerges. 7 women killed over 7 weeks, positioned identically. 1943, 1968, 197, 2009. And if the pattern holds 2024, I finished this year. It's already started. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Patricia Wells was found in her apartment on the south side, positioned at her kitchen table, hands folded, head tilted left. The detectives wrote it off as a robbery gone wrong, but I knew better. She showed me crime scene photos that hadn't been filed yet. The positioning was identical to the 1968 victims. 2 more since then, she continued. Maria Santos and Jennifer Chen. Same positioning, same neighborhood, all within a 6-block radius of Wallace Street. We need to alert. Alert who? Tell them what? That a pattern from a dead suspect is repeating itself. That someone is copying crimes from sealed files that supposedly no one has access to. She laughed bitterly. I tried that in 2009. They said I was seeing patterns that weren't there, that I was burned out. That's how I ended up in evidence instead of on the street. But if people are dying, they are, and more will, unless we figure out who has access to these old cases and why they're recreating them. She leaned forward. Thaddeus, I requested you for this position specifically. Your record shows you're observant, methodical, and most importantly, you don't dismiss things just because they seem impossible. What are you saying? I'm saying someone in this building is either copying these crimes or has been committing them all along. Someone with access to the evidence room who knows the patterns, who's been here long enough to span multiple iterations. That's impossible. The killer from 1968 died. A man named Barnabas died. But what if Barnabas wasn't one person? What if it's a name that gets passed down? A role that someone assumes? She pulled out employment records. Look at this. In 1943, there was a janitor named Barnabas working in this building. In 1968, a different Barnabas was working as a file clerk. In 1987, B. Barnabas in maintenance. 2009, Barnabas Smith in it. Common name, is it? When's the last time you met someone named Barnabas? She had a point. There's more, she said. Traffany, our evidence clerk. She's been here 30 years, she says. But I found employment records going back to 1952 for a P. Faney. Same description, silver hair, large glasses. Could be her mother, could be a relative, or it could be her lying about her age. I had the same thought, so I did some digging. Found a photograph from a department Christmas party in 1964. She handed me a faded black and white photo. There, standing behind the evidence desk, was a woman who looked exactly like Faney. Same face, same glasses, same silver hair pulled into a bun. That can't be her, can't it? This building has secrets, Thaddeus. Old secrets. And some of them are still walking around, still working here, still killing. A chill ran through me. You think, Penny, I think someone in this building has been using the evidence room as a reference library for murder. They study the old cases, perfect the methods, and every 20 years or so they recreate them. And I think they've been doing it for much longer than anyone realizes. Why every 20 years? Long enough for people to forget, for detectives to retire or die, for patterns to be dismissed as coincidence. She stood up, walked to her window overlooking the city. That I'm dying, cancer. I have maybe 6 months. That's why I need someone to continue this investigation. Someone who won't let it die with me. The revelation about Evangeline's cancer hit me hard, but I tried not to show it. She needed someone strong, someone who could continue her work, not someone who would pity her. What do you need me to do? I asked. Tonight after Fanny leaves, she always leaves at exactly 2 a.m. for her lunch break. I need you to search the oldest section of the evidence room, the part that supposedly doesn't exist anymore. What do you mean? She pulled out an old blueprint of the building. This is from 1923 when they converted the brewery. See this area? She pointed to a large section in the sub. It's marked as evidence archive. But in the 1952 renovation plans, that whole area is marked as sealed structural damage. Except I've been down there. The structure is fine. It's full of evidence from cases going back to the 1920s. Cases that were never digitized, never officially logged. And Thaddeus, some of those cases, they show the same pattern. 7 women, same positioning going back to 1923. 100 years at least, maybe more. The brewery records from before 1923 show employee deaths that match the pattern too. Always 7 women, always over 7 weeks, always the same positioning. I felt overwhelmed. How is this possible? I don't know, but I think the answer is in that sealed section. And I think Fanny knows about it. Maybe she's involved. Maybe she's just been turning a blind eye, but she knows. That night I waited until 2 a.m. True to Evangeline's word, Fanny left for her break, something I'd never seen her do before. She usually ate at her desk, never leaving her post, but at exactly 2 a.m., she stood, put on her coat, and walked out without a word. I waited 5 minutes, then headed to the evidence room's deepest section. Behind a shelf unit that hadn't been moved in decades, I found what Evangeline had described. A door painted over multiple times with a faded sign reading, "Archive, authorized personnel only." The lock had been replaced recently, but I had bolt cutters. The chain snapped easily, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Someone had been maintaining this entrance. The smell hit me first. Old paper, mold, and something else. Something organic and wrong. I clicked on my flashlight and descended the narrow stairs. The archive was enormous, stretching beyond what should have been the building's foundation. Rows and rows of shelves filled with evidence boxes, some dating back to the 1920s. But these weren't organized like the modern evidence room. These were arranged by date, by method, by some system I couldn't immediately understand. I found a section labeled simply the collection, and my blood went cold. Inside were boxes dated 1923, 1943, 1968, 1-97, 2009. All the years Evangeline had identified. Each box contained similar contents. Photos of 7 women, all positioned identically, all killed over exactly 49 days. But there were more years, 1901, 1878, 1854. The photos gave way to Dierot types, then to detailed sketches. The pattern went back further than the building, further than the police department itself. I was so absorbed in the discovery that I didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. "Officer Thaddeus," I spun around. Praphany stood at the bottom of the stairs, but she looked different, younger somehow despite her silver hair. Her eyes behind those large glasses were sharp, predatory. "You're not supposed to be here," she said calmly. "Neither are you," she smiled. "Oh, but I am. I've always been here. Since 1923, when my grandmother started working the evidence desk, and her mother before her when this was still a brewery. We've always been the keepers of the collection. The murders are not murders, they're preservation. Every 21 years, 7 women are chosen. They become part of Chicago's history, part of its pattern. It's a tradition older than this city. You're insane, am I? Look around you, officer. Look at all this evidence of crime, violence, death. Chicago is built on blood. The stockyards, the gang wars, the serial killers. Violence is in the city's DNA. The collection simply concentrates it. 7 deaths every 21 years to prevent hundreds more. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Check the crime statistics for the years after each collection. They dropped significantly. It's as if the city's bloodlust is satisfied for a time. She moved closer, and I noticed she was holding something, an old police revolver. the kind that hadn't been used in decades. My family has maintained this balance for over a century. We don't kill them ourselves. We simply ensure the pattern continues. Who kills them? The city does. It chooses someone. Someone who understands the need for preservation. In 1968, it was a man who called himself Barnabas. In 1987, it was a woman named Barbara. In 2009, a different Barnabas. The name changes, but the role remains. And now it's 2024, and 3 have already been chosen. 4 more will complete the pattern. She raised the gun slightly unless someone interferes. Evangeline knows about this. Detective Evangeline suspects, but she's dying, and soon her suspicions will die with her. Cancer is tragic, but sometimes convenient. You gave her cancer. Don't be ridiculous. I'm a record keeper, not a poisoner. But I knew about it before she did. Access to medical records is one of the perks of my position. So you're just going to let 4 more women die? I'm going to ensure the pattern completes. It's what my family has always done. We're the witnesses, the record keepers. We ensure the collection is properly documented, properly preserved. And if I try to stop it, she sighed, then you'll become evidence yourself. It wouldn't be the first time someone had an accident in these old tunnels. The building has so many dangerous areas, so many places where someone could fall, hit their head, disappear. I thought about my options. I was alone, she was armed, and no one knew I was down here. But I also knew something she didn't. I'd been recording our entire conversation on my phone. You're right about the building being dangerous, I said. But you're wrong about no one knowing I'm here. Her eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Evangeline sent me here. If I don't report back, she'll send others. At 2:30 in the morning, I doubt it. We stood there in standoff, surrounded by a century of evidence, a century of patterns. Then I heard something that made both of us freeze. Footsteps above us, multiple sets moving fast. Police evidence room search. The voice was loud, authoritative. Praphany's face went pale. You called them. No, but Evangeline did. She knew you'd show yourself if I came down here alone. The footsteps were on the stairs now. Praphany looked at the gun in her hand, then at me, then at the endless rows of evidence. For a moment I thought she might shoot. Then she set the gun down on a shelf very carefully, as if it was just another piece of evidence to be catalogued. 100 red years of tradition, she said softly, ended by one curious cop. Traditions based on murder need to end. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't think stopping me stops the pattern. The city has a will of its own, Officer Thaddeus. It demands blood, and it will have it one way or another. The collection was a way to control it, to limit it. Without us, without the pattern, the violence will be random, chaotic, worse. The police burst in, weapons drawn. Leading them was Detective Evangeline herself, looking frail but determined. Praphany Mills, she said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and about a dozen other charges I'll figure out once we process all this. As they cuffed Fanny, she looked at me one last time. The 4th victim will be chosen tomorrow night. The killer is already in motion. I was the only one who knew how to identify them, how to stop them. Without me, the remaining 4 will die, and you'll never catch who's doing it. Fanny was processed and held without bail. The evidence room's secret archive was sealed off as a crime scene, but her warning haunted me. 4 more women would die, and we had no idea who the killer was. Evangeline and I spent the next 18 hours going through everything we'd found in the archive. The pattern was consistent. Every 21 years, 7 women, all living alone, all between the ages of 25 and 35, all killed in their homes and positioned identically. But the killer's identity changed each time, and there were no clear connections between them. Look at this, Evangeline said, showing me a report from 1987. The killer that year was Barbara Nolan, a nurse at Chicago General. She confessed to all 7 murders, said she was completing the collection, hung herself in her cell before trial. And 2009 Barnabas Smith, IT worker, also confessed, also killed himself. Same with the 1968 Barnabas. She rubbed her temples. They all use variations of the same name. They all confess and they all die before they can be properly questioned, like they're programmed to do it or chosen. Praphany said the city chooses them. What if she wasn't being metaphorical? What if there's some kind of selection process? I thought about it. She said her family were the witnesses, the record keepers. What if they don't just document the pattern? What if they guide it, choose vulnerable people, manipulate them somehow? But how, and who's doing it now if Fanny is in custody? My phone rang. It was Detective Morrison from Homicide. Thaddeus, we've got another one. Woman found dead in her apartment on South Princeton. Same positioning as the others. The fourth victim. We arrived at the scene within 20 minutes. The apartment was small, tidy, and the victim, Angela Rodriguez, 28, a teacher, was seated at her kitchen table exactly like the others. The killer had even cleaned up after themselves, leaving no obvious forensic evidence. There's something else, Morrison said, leading us to the bedroom. We found this. On the dresser was an old leather journal, similar to the ones we'd found in the archive. Inside, written in neat handwriting, was a detailed account of the first 3 murders and plans for the remaining 4, including Angela. The last entry was dated that morning. Whoever wrote this knew we arrested Fanny, Evangeline said. They're accelerating the timeline. I studied the handwriting. It was different from Fanny's, more masculine, but there was something familiar about it. Then it hit me. I'd seen this writing before on evidence tags in the storage room. We need to check the evidence room employment records, I said. Someone else has been accessing the archive. Back at the station, we pulled records for everyone with evidence room access. There were 17 people total, including me. We started cross-referencing them with the dates of the murders, looking for patterns. Wait, Evangeline said, pointing at one name. Marcus Brennan, night janitor. He's been here 15 years. Has master keys to everything, including the evidence room. I've seen him, I said. Quiet guy, maybe 50. Always working late, too young to be connected to the earlier patterns, unless it's a family thing like with P. Faney. Check his employment application. We pulled his file. Under emergency contact, it listed his mother, Barbara Brennan, formerly Barbara Nolan. The 197 killer, Evangeline breathed. She didn't hang herself. That must have been faked, so the killers don't die. They disappear, have children, and train them to continue the pattern. It's a network. Prefany's family maintains the records. Someone else's family does the killing, and they've been working together for over a century. We put out an alert for Marcus Brennan, but he'd already clocked out for the day. His address on file led to an empty apartment. He'd moved out months ago without updating his records. He's in the wind, Morrison said, and we have no idea where he'll strike next. But I had an idea. The journal we found, he left it on purpose. He wants us to know about the pattern, wants us to understand. If we look at the previous victims' addresses, maybe there's a geographical pattern. We mapped out all the victims' locations going back decades. They formed a rough circle around a specific area, the old Stockyards district, now mostly abandoned industrial buildings. He's got to be hiding somewhere in that area. Evangeline said, somewhere with access to the old tunnel systems Prefany mentioned. We assembled a task force and began searching the district building by building. It was slow, frustrating work. Many of the buildings were condemned, dangerous to enter. Others were owned by shell companies that took hours to trace. Then 2 nights later, we got a break. A patrol unit spotted someone matching Brennan's description, entering an abandoned meatpacking plant. By the time we arrived, he was gone. But we found something else. A makeshift living space in the plant's basement, connected to the old tunnel system. The tunnels were a maze, but Brennan had marked his path with chalk symbols. We followed them deeper and deeper, until we reached a large chamber that must have been part of the original brewery. And there we found them, 3 women, unconscious but alive, seated at a long table. The final 3 victims. Evangeline said he was going to kill them all at once, complete the pattern in one night. We called for paramedics and began processing the scene. That's when we found Brennan's real journal, not the prop he'd left at the crime scene. This one detailed everything: the history of the pattern, the families involved, the belief system behind it. According to the journal, the pattern started in 1854 with the city's first serial killer, who believed that sacrificing 7 women would appease the spirit of Chicago and prevent greater disasters. The Stockyard fires of 1865, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, both happened when the pattern was interrupted. The families had been maintaining it ever since, convinced that without these ritualistic murders, Chicago would face catastrophe. It's insane, Morrison said, reading over my shoulder. But they believe it, Evangeline replied, and they've convinced others. Look at this list. Judges, cops, city officials, who knew about the pattern and allowed it to continue because they bought into the superstition. The list included names I recognized, people still in positions of power. The conspiracy was bigger than just two families. It was a network of believers, all convinced that 7 deaths every 21 years was a small price to pay for the city's survival. We arrested 12 people that night, based on the journal's information, but Marcus Brennan was still missing. I was heading home the next morning exhausted, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Thaddeus. The voice was calm, measured. Marcus Brennan, where are you? That's not important. I wanted you to know that you've disrupted something you don't understand. The pattern isn't superstition. It's balance. Chicago was built on violence, and violence demands its due. You're a killer hiding behind mythology. Am I? Check the news today, officer. See what happens when the pattern breaks. He hung up. I turned on the radio and the news was full of it. A massive gang shooting on the south side. 12 dead. A family annihilated in Lincoln Park. A spree killer targeting random victims downtown. In one day, Chicago had seen more murders than it usually saw in a month. Coincidence, Evangeline said when I called her. Or copycat crimes inspired by the media coverage of the collection murders. But doubt crept in. What if the believers were right? What if the pattern, horrible as it was, actually did keep something worse at bay? That evening, I went back to the evidence room, now empty and sealed off. I stood in the entrance to the secret archive, thinking about all those boxes of evidence, all those carefully documented murders spanning more than a century. Having second thoughts, I turned. Fernie stood there with 2 officers being escorted to an interrogation room. She'd been brought back for additional questioning. The violence today is just the beginning, she said. My family didn't create the pattern, Officer Thaddeus. We discovered it. Chicago has always demanded blood. We just found a way to give it the minimum amount. 7 women every 21 years instead of hundreds randomly throughout. It's mathematics, really. Cold, horrible mathematics. The officers led her away, but her words stayed with me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the pattern, the violence, the possibility that we'd stopped something necessary. 3 days later, Marcus Brennan was found dead in the Chicago River. He'd been shot multiple times, execution style. No witnesses, no suspects. The killing stopped. Both the collection murders and the spike in random violence. The city returned to its normal level of crime, as if the pattern had reset itself. But I knew it hadn't. In 21 years, someone else would try to complete the collection. Someone who believed, like the families before them, that 7 deaths could prevent hundreds. And someone like me would have to stop them. Would have to make the same choice I'd made, to reject the pattern regardless of the consequences. 6 months passed. The collection murders became a media sensation. Chicago's century of ritual killings, the Tribune called it. Books were written, documentaries filmed, conspiracy theories flourished. But for those of us who'd lived through it, who'd seen the evidence, the reality was more complex than any headline could capture. Detective Evangeline died 4 months after we closed the case. The cancer took her quickly once it really set in. I visited her in hospice the day before she passed. Thaddeus, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I need to tell you something about the evidence room, about what we found. Save your strength. No, listen. I've been researching the pattern. It's not unique to Chicago. I found similar cases in New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, every major American city built on industry and blood. They all have their own versions, their own cycles. You're saying this is nationwide, global, maybe? Anywhere humans congregate in massive numbers, anywhere violence becomes concentrated, the patterns emerge. 7, 13, 21, sacred numbers, ritual numbers, people trying to control chaos through ceremony. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. The evidence room in District 7. It's just one note in a network. The families, the believers, they're everywhere. We stopped one iteration, but the pattern will continue. Someone needs to watch for it. The FBI took over the investigation. The FBI has believers too. Check who gets assigned to these cases. Check how many get buried. She coughed, specks of blood on her lips. Promise me you'll keep watching. I promised. What else could I do? After Evangeline's funeral, I put in for a transfer. I couldn't go back to the evidence room. Couldn't walk those aisles knowing what had been hidden there for decades. But my request was denied. The new chief, Chief Harrington, called me into his office. Officer Thaddeus, You have invaluable experience with the evidence system. We need you to help reorganize to ensure nothing like this happens again. So with respect, I think fresh eyes would be better. The decision is made. You'll be working with our new evidence supervisor to implement better oversight protocols. The new supervisor turned out to be Detective Rachel Cross, a 15-year veteran from Internal Affairs. She was thorough, skeptical, and exactly what the evidence room needed. Together, we catalogued every item in the secret archive, cross-referenced it with modern cases, and built a database of pattern crimes going back 150 years. Jesus, she said one evening, looking at our work. There are dozens of patterns. The collection is just one. Look at this. Every 13 years, 3 children disappear from the same neighborhood in Bridgeport. Every 9 years, a family of 4 is murdered in Lincoln Park. Always the same methods, always the same timing. Copycats for 150 years. That's not copying. That's tradition. We reported our findings, but the response was muted. The official line was that these were coincidences, that pattern-seeking humans were seeing connections where none existed. But privately, several senior detectives approached me. "You did good work stopping the collection," Detective Morrison said one night over beers, "but some of us think maybe it shouldn't have been stopped. You believe 7 women should die. I believe in math. 7 deaths every 21 years versus the spike in violence when the pattern breaks. You saw what happened those 3 days, 47 dead. If that happens every time the pattern is interrupted, then we find another way to prevent violence, not human sacrifice." He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe some solutions are ugly but necessary." I started keeping my own records, documenting everyone who expressed sympathy for the pattern, everyone who suggested maybe the old ways had merit. The list was disturbingly long and included people at every level of law enforcement. One night, working late in the evidence room, I heard footsteps in the restricted section. It should have been empty. Only Cross and I had access now. I drew my weapon and moved carefully toward the sound. I found a man standing in front of the collection archive, studying the boxes. He was young, maybe 25, with an intense face and clothes that didn't quite fit the era. Too formal, like something from the 1960s. "Hands up," I commanded. He turned slowly, no fear in his eyes. "Officer Thaddeus, I've been wanting to meet you." "How did you get in here?" "I've always had access." "My name is Barnabas." My blood went cold. "Barnabas is dead multiple times over." "Barnabas isn't a person. It's a role. Like Faney was a role. My predecessor failed, but the pattern requires a Barnabas." He smiled sadly. "I don't want this responsibility, but someone has to maintain the balance. The pattern is broken." "It's over." "Is it? Check your crime statistics for the last 6 months. Notice anything unusual?" I had noticed violent crime was up 32%. The highest spike in decades. The city seemed angrier, more chaotic. But that could be explained by social factors, economic pressure, anything but. "You're seeing it," he said, the pattern trying to reassert itself. Without the collection, the violence becomes random, widespread. More people die, just less predictably. So, you're here to start it again. I'm here to make you an offer. You stopped the collection, which means you inherited the responsibility. Help me find a better way. 7 deaths is too many, but 0 is too few. Maybe we can reduce it. Maybe we can find volunteers, terminal patients, who want their deaths to mean something. You're talking about human sacrifice. I'm talking about damage control. The city demands blood. Officer Thaddeus, the question is whether we give it willingly or let it take randomly. I raised my weapon higher. I'm arresting you for what? Standing in a room I'm not supposed to access. I'll be out in hours. He walked toward me, hands still visible but unafraid. Think about my offer. You know how to find me. How? The same way you found the archive. The same way you found Marcus Brennan. The pattern always reveals itself to those who need to see it. He walked past me and I let him. What else could I do? Shoot an unarmed man for trespassing? At the door he turned back. 17 years until the next collection. That gives us time to find a better solution. Or you can pretend the pattern doesn't exist and watch the body count rise. Your choice, officer. He left and I stood there among the evidence of a century of ritualistic murder, wondering if he was right. Could evil be managed but not eliminated? Could we reduce suffering by accepting a smaller controlled amount? I reported the encounter, but the security footage showed nothing. Officially, I'd been alone in the evidence room all night. Detective Cross believed me. She'd seen too much strangeness in the archives to dismiss anything, but there was nothing we could do. 3 weeks later, Fanny Mills was found dead in her cell. The official cause was suicide, but the autopsy showed she'd been dead for hours before the hanging. Someone had killed her and staged the scene. The real Fanny, the keeper of records, had been eliminated. That same night, the evidence room was burglarized. Nothing was taken, but something was left. A single evidence box labeled with next year's date. Inside was a letter addressed to me. Officer Thaddeus, the pattern will continue with or without the old families. New believers are already emerging. People who've seen the statistics, who understand the mathematics of violence. You can't stop them all, but you could guide them. 7 deaths every 21 years was the old way. Perhaps 5 every 25 years would suffice, or 3 every 30. The pattern is flexible. It just requires acknowledgement. Consider this. In the next 17 years, based on current trends, Chicago will see approximately 8 out of 500 murders. If reinstating a modified collection could reduce that by even 10%, you'd save 850 lives at the cost of a few. The math is cold but clear. The new families are organizing. They've studied the archives you so carefully catalogued. They know the history, the methods, the justifications. They will act with or without your cooperation, but with your guidance, perhaps they could act more humanely. The choice, as always, is yours, B. I burned the letter, but the words stayed with me. Every murder reported on the news, every grieving family, every senseless act of violence made me wonder. Could controlled evil prevent greater evil? It was a devil's bargain, but the devil seemed to be winning either way. Detective Cross found me one morning studying the crime statistics, running the numbers for the 100th time. "You're torturing yourself," she said. "What if they're right? What if the pattern actually works? Then we find a pattern that doesn't require murder. Community intervention, prevention programs, addressing root causes of violence. We've been trying that for decades. Violence adapts." She sat down across from me. "Thaddeus, I've been doing some research of my own. The cities that don't have these patterns, they're not paradises. They have their own problems, their own violence. The pattern might not be preventing anything. It might just be giving people an illusion of control. Or maybe those cities have their own patterns we haven't discovered yet." She couldn't argue with that. We'd found too many hidden traditions, too many secret histories. I continued working in the evidence room for another year, watching for signs of new patterns emerging. I found them, small at first, tentative. Someone was testing the waters, seeing if they could restart the collection without detection. 3 women died over 3 months, all positioned similarly to the collection victims, but with small variations. The killer was learning, experimenting. I tracked the patterns, built a profile, and eventually identified him. A young man named Brandon Mills, whose grandmother was Barbara Nolan, the 1987 killer. Another family member, another generation trying to continue the tradition. We arrested him before he could kill again. He confessed immediately, seeming almost relieved. "I didn't want to do it," he said during interrogation, "but I kept having dreams, seeing visions of Chicago burning, drowning, dying. The only way to stop them was to continue the pattern. My grandmother taught me before she died. She said it was a responsibility, a burden our family carried." "Your grandmother died in prison in 1987. "No, she didn't. She lived under a different name, raised me to understand the necessity. When the dream started, I knew it was my turn." The dreams, other suspects had mentioned them, visions of catastrophe that could only be prevented by completing the collection. Mass delusion or something more. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist brought in to evaluate Brandon, had a theory. Generational trauma combined with inherited delusion. These families have been telling themselves these stories for so long. They've become neurologically programmed to believe them. The stress of fighting these inherited beliefs might actually trigger visual and auditory hallucinations. It was a comforting explanation, one that fit within normal understanding, but it didn't explain the statistical anomalies, the patterns that seem to transcend individual actors. Brandon Mills was convicted and sentenced to life, but during the trial I noticed people in the gallery taking notes, studying the proceedings with unusual intensity, new believers perhaps learning from the mistakes of the old. After the trial, I finally took a leave of absence. I needed distance from the evidence room, from the patterns, from the constant weight of impossible choices. I spent 3 months in Michigan, staying with my sister, trying to remember what normal life felt like. But even there I found patterns. The local newspaper had a series of unsolved murders from the 1950s. 7 women over 7 weeks, all positioned identically. A copycat of Chicago's collection or evidence that the pattern had spread. I returned to Chicago with a new perspective. The patterns weren't going away, whether they were real or delusion. People would continue to believe, continue to kill in service of those beliefs. The best I could do was watch, document, and intervene when possible. Detective Cross had been promoted to oversee all evidence operations for the district. She'd implemented new protocols, better oversight, regular audits. The secret archive was now officially catalogued, studied by academics and FBI behavioral analysts. We've had 3 attempts to restart various patterns in the last month, she told me when I returned. All stopped before anyone died, thanks to the monitoring systems we put in place. But they keep trying. They always will. As long as people believe violence can be controlled through ritual, someone will attempt it. I returned to duty, but not to the evidence room. I couldn't face those archives again. Couldn't walk among the preserved moments of so much death. Instead, I went back to patrol, back to the streets where at least the violence was random, senseless, without the weight of centuries of tradition behind it. But I kept my promise to Evangeline. I watched for patterns, documented anomalies, tracked the believers. I became Chicago's unofficial expert on ritual crime, consulted on cases that didn't quite make sense, that showed signs of being part of something larger. 17 years have passed now since we stopped the original collection. If the pattern holds, someone will try to restart it in 4 years. Already I'm seeing signs. Graffiti with the 3-circle symbol, whispers in criminal networks about the necessity, a spike in interest about the 2024 murders. I'm older now, close to retirement with bad knees and too many sleepless nights behind me. But I'll keep watching because someone has to. Someone has to stand between the believers and their victims, between the pattern and the people it would consume. The evidence room still operates in District 7's basement. New officers work there, unaware of most of its history. Sometimes I visit, walk the aisles, check that the old patterns aren't re-emerging. The secret archive is sealed but not destroyed. We learned that destroying evidence, even of ancient crimes, only drives the believers deeper underground. Last week, I found a note tucked into my locker. The pattern remembers even if the city forgets. B. Barnabas, or someone claiming the name, is still out there, still watching, still waiting, maybe planning something for the anniversary, maybe just reminding me that the vigil never ends. Detective Cross thinks I'm paranoid. The new chief thinks I'm obsessed. Maybe they're right, but every time I'm tempted to let it go, to stop watching, I remember Evangeline's words. The pattern will continue. Someone needs to watch for it. So I watch and I wait, and I hope that when the next iteration begins, and it will begin, someone younger, stronger, and smarter than me will be ready to stop it. Because the truth about Chicago, about any great city built on blood and ambition, is that violence is woven into its foundation. You can't eliminate it, can't cure it, can't wish it away. You can only try to prevent it from organizing, from finding purpose, from becoming something worse than random tragedy. The collection was stopped, but the impulse that created it remains. Somewhere in the city tonight, someone is dreaming of preservation, of control, of turning chaos into order through blood. They're planning, preparing, waiting for their moment. And I'll be waiting too. My name is Officer Thaddeus. I've been a Chicago cop for 21 years now. I work the night shift, patrol the South Side, and watch for patterns that shouldn't exist because someone has to. Because the evidence room taught me that the past is never really past. That patterns echo through generations, and that the only thing standing between the city and its darkest traditions is people willing to see them, name them, and stop them.